the cradle of civilization, where it all began. Long before the modern world emerged, before the hum of machines or the glow of artificial light, there was a quiet land nestled between two rivers where the first whispers of civilization began to form like ripples on a still, ancient sea. This land, known to us as Sumer, sat between the Tigris and Euphrates in a region we now call Mesopotamia, Greek for the land between rivers. Here, nearly 6,000 years ago, humanity took its first careful steps out of the shadows of wandering and into the slow rhythm of cities, writing, temples, and memory. The people of Sumer did not build with haste or force. They stacked mud brick upon mud brick with patience, forming settlements that would become the first known cities. Eridu, believed by some to be the oldest city on earth, and Uruk, a place so grand in its time that its name may have inspired the very word Iraq. These cities weren't merely collections of homes. They were sacred centers of thought, trade, ritual, and governance, watched over by towering ziggurats that reached gently upward toward the heavens, as though to ask the stars above for their wisdom. But what made Sumer truly remarkable was not just its architecture, it was its voice, carved into wet clay in the form of cuneiform. These wedge-shaped markings, pressed by a stylus, held the weight of transactions, myths, prayers, and laws. Through them, stories traveled through time, surviving even as empires fell. Among these early texts, we encounter names like Enlil, the god of air, Enki, the god of water and creation, and An, the sky god who ruled above them all. These were not abstract ideas, but living presences in Sumerian life, seen in the rhythms of rainfall, the glow of stars, and the silence before sunrise. The Sumerians believed the gods walked among them not as invisible spirits, but as beings with tasks, tempers, and intentions. Some myths even suggest the gods were not always pleased with the burdens of managing Earth, which led to the creation of humans to bear the load of labor. Eridu, especially, was said to be the first city built by the gods themselves, a divine gift given to the earth, and in Uruk, the legendary king Gilgamesh would one day rule a man so revered, his life became an epic that still echoes today. But beneath these stories lies a deeper mystery. How did such complex systems of thought, writing, engineering, and spirituality emerge so suddenly, as if awakened all at once? Was it merely the inevitable progress of the human mind, or, as some quietly wonder, was it a spark from somewhere else? We may never truly know. What we do know is that in the soft cradle of Sumer, humanity found its first rhythm, a heartbeat of stone, clay, and sky, and that in the ruins of Eridu and the myths of Uruk, we can still hear the gentle echoes of the beginning, calling out not in thunder, but in a hush that invites us to listen more closely, to breathe more slowly, and to remember that all great journeys, even those that stretch beyond the stars, must begin somewhere quiet and still. Asterisk, 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 the Sumerian Pantheon, more than just gods when we close our eyes and imagine the dawn of mythology. We often think of distant heavens, celestial beings, and ancient stories carried through the winds of time. But in the fertile crescent where Sumer once bloomed, the divine was not distant. It was deeply entangled in daily life, in the soil beneath their sandals, in the rivers that carried silt to their crops, and in the stars that turned slowly overhead. The Sumerian Pantheon was not a remote gallery of unreachable deities. It was a living system of roles and responsibilities. Carefully ordered and strangely familiar, as though crafted with intention and memory. At the very top sat An, also known as Anu in later traditions, the sky god and father of all. He was the unseen dome above the world, vast and unknowable, yet quiet and steady like the night sky. From him came the authority to rule what the Sumerians called me, the divine decrees that shaped reality. But An did not act alone. Beside him stood Enlil, god of air and storms, often regarded as the true administrator of Earth's affairs. It was Enlil who separated the heavens from the earth, creating space for life to exist. He was not always gentle. His winds could bring floods, and his silence could mean disapproval, but he represented the force that moved things forward, that cleared the way for change. Then came Enki, the god of water, wisdom, and creation, who lived in the deep freshwater abyss called the Abzu. Enki was the thinker, the engineer, the bringer of gifts that humanity could use. It was he who formed humans out of clay to relieve the gods from labor. Where Enlil ruled with structure, Enki shaped with creativity, often bending the rules to help mortals, and watching them all, guiding and healing and giving birth to life. Itself was Ninhursag, the great mother goddess, the womb of the earth. She was nurturing yet powerful, holding in her presence both fertility and discipline. These four were not simply names etched into temple walls. They were the cornerstones of the Sumerian worldview, woven into the rhythm of seasons and the architecture of temples. But even beyond their divine duties, there lingers a question that has persisted for generations. Were these gods merely symbols, or were they, as some believe, visitors from somewhere beyond? For when one reads the oldest cuneiform tablets, particularly the mythic and kingly texts, one begins to notice strange consistencies, references to skyboats, divine beings descending from above, gods who came from a distant place and taught the Sumerians to write, build, and rule. The Sumerians never called their gods invisible. They drew them with purpose, bearded, robed figures, often wearing horned helmets, standing among stars or riding what appeared to be celestial vehicles. In the famous Sumerian King List, the reigns of early kings are described in terms of thousands of years, especially those who ruled before the flood. These extended lifespans weren't random. They pointed to a time when divine beings walked openly with men. Enki's Abzu, for instance, has been interpreted not just as a mythological sea, but as a hidden subterranean chamber of knowledge. Enlil's command over storms and wind, and An's celestial role, have drawn parallels to technologies far beyond the Bronze Age. Ninhursag's power to shape life echoes tales of genetic crafting, and yet the Sumerians did not claim this wisdom as their own. They wrote of receiving it, of being given tools and language, kingship and order. These gods were not unreachable. They came, they taught, and they sometimes punished. Could it be that they were simply the human mind's way of understanding nature and governance? Or is there a deeper layer, one where beings from another realm, perhaps not divine but advanced, once guided a young civilization toward the dawn of progress? Even today, scholars and seekers debate this, often quietly, aware that the boundary between mythology and history is not as clear as we once believed. The gods were Menutu, the sun; Nana, the moon; Inanna, fierce, goddess of love and war. But it is the core foreign, Enlil, Enki, and Ninhursag, who form a quadrangle that mimics many later traditions. Like the Olympians of Greece or the archangels of Abrahamic faiths, they held dominion not just over elements, but over time, justice, and fate. Their stories contain lessons, mysteries, and sometimes contradictions. Enlil banished humanity, Enki saved it. Ninasag created life, then cursed it, then healed it. These shifts suggest a pantheon not frozen in perfection, but alive with decision and doubt mirroring human choices. Perhaps that is what draws us to them still, the sense that these figures were more than myth, yet not entirely divine. They were mentors, rulers, builders, and possibly visitors from far beyond. Whether they came from the stars or the deep wells of imagination, the Sumerian gods remain unlike any others in recorded history. They are the foundation stones of our oldest stories, and in their myths we see not just ancient belief, but early memory of something profound, powerful, and partially forgotten. As we let their names echo gently in our minds, an Enlil Enki, we are remembering the shapes that helped mold the very first civilization, and maybe, just maybe, the hands that reached down to help us begin. Cuneiform secrets, clay tablets that whisper the unknown when thinks of history. The mind often pictures towering monuments or rusted tools buried in the earth. But perhaps the most intimate remnants of the ancient world are not carved in stone or forged in bronze. They are inscribed in soft clay, baked by time and fate into silent witnesses. These are the cuneiform tablets, small and unassuming at first glance, yet containing within them the thoughts, fears, hopes, and cosmic questions of people who lived thousands of years ago, especially those in the Sumerian and Akkadian civilizations. Each mark, each wedge-shaped stroke pressed into the surface, was a conversation between the mortal and the eternal, a record not only of commerce and kingship, but also of gods, creation, and the essence of existence. In the quiet vaults of museums and hidden archaeological archives lie the stories that shaped how humanity saw itself in the vastness of the cosmos. And among these are texts like the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian epic of creation, which echoes older Sumerian motifs and introduces a divine drama where celestial beings shaped the world not just with power, but with intention. It begins not with light or land, but with water to great cosmic forces, Apsu, the sweet fresh water, and Tiamat, the salt sea. Their union gave birth to younger gods, whose rise disturbed the ancient balance. Conflict followed, one that ended with the slaying of Tiamat by Marduk, the champion of the younger gods, who then used her divided body to fashion the heavens and the earth. It is a tale that blends violence and creativity, myth and memory, and while it may seem like a simple story of divine struggle, hidden beneath its lines are whispers of something more, a transmission of knowledge about how ancient people understood the origins of the cosmos, encoded in symbolism and ritual. The Sumerians had their own versions, Solder, perhaps closer to the source, where gods like Enki, known for his intellect and connection to the deep waters of wisdom, played central roles in shaping not just the land, but also humanity itself. In one account, the gods grow weary of their toil and decide to create human beings as helpers. The process is not immediate, but trial and error experiments with clay, blood, and divine essence, centered at last a form is made that can think, speak, and serve. These tales speak not only of creation, but of interaction, as if humans were not simply made, but negotiated into existence. And then there are the Anunnaki, a group of gods whose presence in the tablets is consistent and puzzling. Described as judges of the underworld, bringers of divine order, and sometimes as celestial visitors. Their name translates roughly to those who came from heaven to earth. They appear not only in spiritual texts, but also in administrative and kingly records, suggesting their presence was considered real enough to record, and not merely symbolic. In one tablet after another, we find references to decrees handed down from the gods, instructions for temple construction that match astronomical alignments, and knowledge that would seem advanced even by later standards. Why would early humans claim to receive agricultural systems, metallurgy, or mathematics directly from the gods, unless these systems truly came from a source beyond their grasp? Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of these tablets is not just what they say, but how they were treated. Some were buried deliberately, stored in libraries like that of Ashurbanipal, suggesting they were seen not only as sacred but as powerful. Others contain mirrored texts, duplicates in both Sumerian and Akkadian, revealing a deep respect for preservation and clarity. And the writing itself, cuneiform, is not alphabetic but symbolic, with some symbols representing ideas rather than sounds, allowing layered meanings that scholars still work to untangle. A single wedge can mean God, sky, or authority, depending on its placement. This suggests not just literacy, but a kind of visual philosophy where meaning was both immediate and mysterious. There are stories of tablets that describe sky chariots, divine beings who glowed or moved with unnatural speed, and cities whose foundations were said to be chosen by the stars. Could these be poetic flourishes, or were they records of actual encounters interpreted through a mythic lens? And then there is the question of the 7 sages, semi-divine beings often sent by Enki to instruct humanity in the arts of civilization. They arrived by boat, were said to wear strange fish-like garments, and left behind teachings in architecture, medicine, and law. The resemblance to visitors from afar is subtle but persistent across texts and cultures. Modern researchers, both traditional and alternative, continue to debate whether these ancient myths were metaphorical or descriptive, whether the gods were real or imagined, and what truths the clay tablets still guard beneath their ancient surfaces. Some see in them the early footprints of humanity's quest for meaning, while others see encoded accounts of contact with higher intelligence, divine or otherwise. Regardless of interpretation, there is something deeply moving in knowing that over 5,000 years ago, people sat by torchlight or under stars, pressing tiny marks into wet clay to ask questions we still ask today. Where did we come from? Who made us, and why? In the stillness of that long-forgotten room, a scribe dips his stylus, not in ink, but in intention. He writes not just for his king, but for the future for us. And across centuries of silence, that tablet speaks, not loudly, but softly, in a voice shaped by patience and longing. The clay crumbles with time, but its message remains. The story of gods who walked the earth, of beings who whispered knowledge into mortal ears, of a creation not born in chaos, but through sacred design, endures. The tablets may be quiet now, resting in museum drawers and sealed archives, but there, truths whatever they are continue to stir questions in our modern minds. What if these myths were not fantasy, but memory? What if the gods of Sumer were not imaginary beings, but echoes of something once real, now distant, and waiting, patiently, to be remembered again? The Ajiji and the toil, servants of the sky, or alien laborers, long before the world knew of great cities or empires, when the sky was still believed to be the roof of the gods and the earth, their carefully molded creation, there existed in the stories of the ancient Mesopotamians a group known as the Agigi, divine beings lesser than the ruling gods, but mighty compared to humans. Their names have faded through the ages, but their role remains delicately inscribed in the myths like quiet echoes through time. According to the Akkadian and Sumerian epics, especially in the telling of the Atrahasis epic, the Igigi were tasked with sustaining the heavens and earth long before humans were ever formed. They were celestial workers, assigned by the higher godsist, specially in low to dig canals, cultivate fields, and maintain the great structures of the world. The stories describe them toiling endlessly beneath the sky, their strength divine but their patience limited. For countless years, they performed their duties in silence, without reward or rest, until one day, wearied and emboldened by their suffering, they chose not to obey any more. In the stillness of the night, when the heavens blinked unknowingly, above, the Igigi gathered and made a decision that would change the course of creation. Some stories say they marched in unison to the gates of Enlil, casting their tools into the earth, refusing to labor any longer under such burdens. It was not just rebellion, it was a cry for meaning, a demand that the gods above take notice of the weight borne by those beneath. What follows in the myths is a meeting of the great gods. Enlil is furious, but his brother Enki, the god of wisdom and deep waters, suggests a different path. Instead of punishing the Igigi or forcing them back into service, Enki proposes creating a new being, one fashioned to share in the toil of the gods. This being would be mortal, yet shaped with intention. It would carry the strength to labor and the mind to understand commands. Thus began the earliest myth of human creation, not as a divine gift or accident of nature, but as a solution to cosmic unrest. The Igigi, once the workforce of the gods, would be freed, and humans would rise in their place not as equals, but as designed helpers. According to some tablets, Enki and the goddess Ninhursag mixed clay from the earth with the blood of a slain divine being to mold the first humans. This detail is quietly haunting, suggesting that life itself was a blend of earth and divine, will, of soil and sacrifice. Some interpretations imply that this mixture contained not just the physical but the essence, perhaps even knowledge, of the god whose blood was used. And this idea of life, born through the transfer of divine substance, led to broader speculations about ancient genetic manipulation, long before the concept of genetics even existed. Was it metaphor or a memory? The rebellion of the Igigi and the rise of the Anunnaki in the mythic hierarchy paints a picture of roles shifting within a celestial order. The Anunnaki, who had long held dominion over judgment, fate, and cosmic balance, now became more involved in human affairs. They were no longer just remote divine figures. They became architects of civilization, rulers of cities, and shapers of human destiny. Some scholars believe this moment in mythology reflects a deeper cultural transition from a time of scattered tribes to the dawn of organized societies, where authority became structured and divine favor tied to cities like Eridu, Uruk, and Nippur. In this lens, the Igigi represent the old order, chaotic, scattered, strained, and the Anunnaki, a new one come, deliberate, organized. And yet, the myths never fully release the Igigi from their story. In later texts, they are said to have returned to the stars, watching, distant but aware. This introduces a quiet mystery. Were the Igigi merely metaphors for outdated gods, or were they symbols for something more? Perhaps a class of beings not entirely gone, just hidden. The name Igigi itself is elusive. Some interpret it to mean those who observe or those of the heavens, while others argue that their name was never meant to be understood, only remembered in hushed reverence. They are often described as living in the sky, separate from the earthbound Anunnaki, leading some modern researchers to suggest they represent ancient accounts of beings not of this world, celestial watchers or visitors whose role in our origin is shrouded in allegory. These interpretations, while speculative, find strength in how consistent the imagery is across various Mesopotamian sources. The idea of a divine labor force, of gods needing assistance, and of the transfer of responsibility from one class of beings to another repeats in different forms across generations of texts. Even the act of rebellion defining human traits attributed not to us, but to these early divine workers, almost as if humanity inherited more than just the task of labor, but the memory of protest, of questioning purpose, of striving towards something beyond what was assigned. In a world where so much was determined by divine decree, the Igigi remind us that even the heavens, in their stories, had workers who wished for freedom. Whether one views these tales as ancient theology, symbolic history, or fragmented memory of a more complex origin, they hold power in their simplicity and strangeness. They suggest that the line between creator and created was not always fixed, that the gods themselves had structure, roles, and disagreements, and that humanity emerged not from a moment of divine love but of divine necessity. And so the tablets whisper still. The Igigi are not forgotten, even if their names are half erased by time. In quiet museum halls and buried ruins, their story remains etched in clay, hidden in dust. Perhaps they were never meant to be center stage, but their refusal to remain silent shaped the myths that would define the rise of civilization. And as you close your eyes, imagining skies lit not by stars, but by watchers unseen, think of those who labored before labor was known, whose choice to speak sparked the story of us. What if they still wait, among the constellations, silent stewards of the past? The arrival of the Anunnaki descending from the stars or mountains. In the stillness of deep time, long before humanity had names for constellations or a written record of its own story. Their echo the softest whispers from ancient Mesopotamian myths, tales of luminous beings who did not rise from the earth, but instead descended from above. Not like thunder crashing, but like stars that gently slid down the curtain of the night. The Anunnaki, those enigmatic figures etched into the earliest clay tablets of the Sumerians, are not described as being born of this world in the way we understand it. Instead, their origin is veiled in celestial metaphors, poetic riddles, and symbolic language that invites the listener not to conclude, but to wonder. In tablets uncovered from the ruins of long-forgotten cities like Eridu, Uruk, and Nippur, the Anunnaki are said to have come from the Duku, the sacred mound, or from Dilmun, a paradise-like place beyond the earthly sphere, or even more. Curiously, from a distant place in the heavens known to some interpretations as Nibiru, term shrouded in even deeper mystery. While mainstream scholars often associate Nibiru with a celestial crossing or a star, others have speculated that it refers to a far-off planet or an orbital path beyond human sight, introducing the possibility that the Anunnaki were not merely divine in spirit, but perhaps in origin as well foreign to the earth, yet deeply involved in its shaping. The mythic narratives do not rush to explain this arrival. They unfold slowly, as if reluctant to reveal too much. We are told they came from the sky or descended upon mountains such as the Zagros Range, the towering natural spine of Mesopotamia. Mountains, in the ancient worldview, were seen as sacred connectors between earth and heaven, the perfect stage for divine descent. In this sense, The arrival of the Anunnaki is not marked by battles or conquest, but by quiet establishment. Temples arose, laws were spoken, cities were founded. These beings, rather than rule with spectacle, brought order, knowledge, and structure. This paints a picture not of invaders, but of architects. And yet questions remain. The Sumerian King List, a text as puzzling as it is ancient, describes kingship descending from heaven, and reigns that lasted not decades, but thousands of years. One ruler is said to have governed for 28,800 years. Another for 36,000. Were these symbolic embellishments, or memories of something we have since forgotten how to explain? Some researchers, looking at these impossible numbers, see exaggeration. Others, however, hear the quiet suggestion of beings for whom time moved differently, those who were not bound by human lifespans. In temple carvings and seal impressions, the Anunnaki are depicted not as formless spirits, but as tall, robed figures, sometimes with wings, sometimes holding tools whose meaning is lost to us. Their eyes are often shown large and attentive, their hands posed in gestures of ritual or guidance. Such imagery, again, does not scream war or power, it whispers stewardship. They are placed beside the tree of life, holding what some call a pine cone, but what others believe to be something more, perhaps an object tied to knowledge, memory, or technology. Even in this art, their position is neither above nor below humanity, but beside advisors, perhaps, or silent overseers. The Epic of Gilgamesh, though written much later, echoes these ideas. Gilgamesh himself is said to be 2/3 divine, and 1/3 humano ratio that puzzles not just mathematicians but What does it mean to be mostly God, but still mortal? Was this the product of divine ancestry? And if so, were the Anunnaki not only rulers but also genetic architects, as some speculative historians suggest? While no definitive answer exists, the way these myths present the Anunnaki's arrival as slow, structured, and deeply intertwined with the foundations of civilizations speaks volumes. In their stories, there is no singular moment of appearance. It is as if they always were, or arrived so long ago that memory itself folds them into the origin of everything. The cities they are associated with are not simply places of trade or shelter, but centers of divine human interaction. The ziggurats, towering temple platforms, are believed to have been constructed as points of connection, not just between priest and deity, but perhaps even between worlds. The Ika, the Great Temple of Enlil in Nippur, is sometimes described as a cosmic axis where heaven and earth once touched. Whether this was literal, symbolic, or a metaphor for something more complex is left deliberately unclear, allowing the listener to dream of possibilities rather than fixate on definitions. Language itself becomes a puzzle. The word Anunnaki means those who came from heaven to earth. It is not a poetic phrase, it is a title, repeated again and again in records and hymns. Some suggest that the plural use Anunnaki hints at a group, not a pantheon of immaterial gods, but a collective of beings who arrived with purpose and coordination. In later Babylonian texts, they become judges of the underworld, reminding us how narratives shift over time. But in the earliest records, they are simply the bringers of civilization. The question of where they came from, Nibiru, the heavens, the stars, or sacred mountains is never answered directly, and perhaps that is the point. In a world so full of certainty, the Anunnaki remain gently undefined. They represent that which is just out of reach in the edge of history and myth, of memory and dream. Some modern interpretations stretch this mystery into theories of ancient extraterrestrial contact. They point to the precision of Mesopotamian astronomy, to the sudden rise of complex systems of law and irrigation, to the myths of skyborne beings shaping humanity not through miracles but through knowledge. These theories, though debated, speak to a deep human instinct to wonder whether we were ever alone in our beginnings. But beyond speculation, what remains most profound is how calmly the myths carry these stories. They do not demand belief. They do not command allegiance. They offer gentle, repeating suggestions that those who came from the stars or from mountains, or from sacred realms beyond our own, did so not in fire or fury, but in stillness, in instruction, and in stewardship. And that perhaps, if we listen closely enough to the ancient clay, to the quiet lines scratched by steady hands thousands of years ago, we might not find answers, but something better, the right questions, in the soft glow of ancient stories. When all else fades, what if we are meant not to prove, but to remember? Ziggurats and the sky ladders worship, stargates or landing pads. When wandering through the soft dust of ancient Mesopotamia in your imagination, your mind may drift toward the grand silhouettes of ziggurats, those stepped, pyramid-like temples that once rose from the plains like great staircases to the sky. Silent now, buried in sand or softened by time, these colossal structures remain as one of the clearest echoes of a world whose beliefs, rituals, and intentions are still not fully understood. Unlike the smooth pyramids of Egypt or the mountain shrines of Mesoamerica, Mesopotamian ziggurats seem to suggest something both earthly and celestial. They were not hollow inside. They did not serve as tombs. Instead, they were built with solid bricks, layer upon layer, platform upon platform, each rising tier bringing the priest or, perhaps, symbolically, the entire civilization closer to the heavens above. They were temples, yes, but perhaps more than just places of worship. The ancient Sumerians called them Anunnaki, meaning house of the foundation of heaven and earth. A phrase which doesn't just suggest divinity, but connection, a bridging of realms. What does it mean, truly, to build a structure not simply for gods, but between worlds? Without cranes, without electricity, without the modern knowledge we rely on today. How did these ancient people construct platforms so perfectly aligned, so enduring, and so mathematically precise? The very materials tell a humble story: mud bricks, fired in sun and kill, carried by hand or with wooden sleds. Yet somehow, out of these fragile beginnings, they erected monoliths that reached higher than any building their world had known. The great ziggurat of yore, dedicated to the moon god Nana, once stood nearly 100 feet high, crowned with a temple at its peak where offerings were made and where, some believed, the gods themselves could descend. Stairways extended from the earth up to this sacred summit, not winding but direct, strong, and symmetrical, like celestial runways. It invites a question that scholars have long debated, and that dreamers have long dared to imagine. Were these temples truly built only for prayer? Or might they have served another purpose, something lost to us, but not forgotten entirely by those who built them? In the calm folds of mythology, we find hints. Ancient texts speak of the gods descending in brilliance, of divine beings landing from above, of encounters that happened not just in dreams, but in designated places. If we take even a poetic reading of these stories, a curious alignment emerges between the architecture and the myths. The ziggurats weren't randomly placed. They were constructed in key cities, centers of power and priesthood, close to sacred rivers and aligned to celestial patterns. Their orientation often mirrored the stars, particularly those constellations that governed agricultural and seasonal rhythms, but also those linked with mythic figures, gods, heroes, and perhaps visitors from beyond. The ziggurat then becomes not just a monument, but a message. Was it a signal, a welcome mat, a symbolic ladder, like the famous dream of Jacob in later Abrahamic tradition, where angels move between earth and heaven freely, using a structure that sounds remarkably like a stepped tower? Even the Epic of Gilgamesh makes mention of traveling beyond the known world, guided by gods and structures that seem fixed to both earth and sky. If the Anunnaki were beings who descended from the heavens or came across the stars, as some believe, then would it not follow that they required places to land, to appear, or to communicate? The ziggurat's uppermost temples, accessed only by priests, were often called waiting rooms for the gods, and within them, rituals were performed not for large gatherings, but for very intimate, specific interactions. There are no broad stages or mass seating areas. Everything about these summits suggests privacy, precision, and importance beyond public ceremony. Still, others argue that their purpose was entirely symbolic, that the ziggurat was meant to represent a sacred mountain, a physical manifestation of rising spirit, or a desire to bring earth nearer to heaven. And this too is a valid reflection. For ancient Mesopotamia was largely flat, and the act of building vertically toward the divine may have represented humanity's deepest longing. But even symbolic gestures can carry practical roots. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps these structures served as both shrine and signal, as landing zones, not in the technological sense, but in the metaphysical one, where energies, beings, or influences from beyond were thought to manifest. The use of baked bricks, glazed with lapis-like blues and sun-reflecting whites, may not have been solely aesthetic. Could it have been functional, to shine, to mark a location from afar? We do not know. Yet the deliberate craftsmanship and size suggest an intention far greater than village pride. And perhaps more interesting is how similar these structures are to stepped pyramids found across the world, in South America, in Southeast Asia, in Egypt, cultures not known to have had contact with one another, yet sharing this common urge to build platforms toward the sky. Why? What memory or instinct was being honored? Could it be that the ziggurats of Mesopotamia were part of a much older tradition, one that predates even Sumer, one that echoes the very shape of our dreams? In the calm corridors of time, ziggurats stand not only as ancient buildings, but as questions made of stone. The mystery is not just in their construction, but in their purpose. We may never find definitive proof of extraterrestrial visitors or divine landings, but what remains is even more powerful, a sense that those who built them believed deeply in connection, that they were not alone, that the heavens were not separate from the earth, but part of the same story. And in the quiet moonlit hours, when the mind drifts softly through forgotten deserts and long-silenced cities, you might imagine a lone priest climbing the ziggurat's high steps. He walks in rhythm with the stars. He carries incense, and as he reaches the summit, he looks upward, not in fear or command, but in welcome, not demanding miracles, but simply opening the door. Enki's gift was humanity engineered or loved into existence. In the gentle hush of time's earliest memories, where clay met water and language had only just begun to stretch its fingers across stone, there rises a story, a quiet, enduring echo about the moment human life was first shaped. In Sumerian lore, it is not chaos or conquest that brings our species into being, but the thoughtful hands of a god named Enki, known also as Ea. Unlike the sterner gods of sky and order, Enki dwelled in the watery deep, in a place called the Abzu, the sweet waters beneath the earth, a space of wisdom, invention, and gentle mischief. He is often portrayed with flowing rivers streaming from his shoulders, symbols of nourishment and knowledge. And it is this god who, when the toil of the celestial beings the Egebeia came too much, stepped forward with an answer. The heavens, it is said, were not without burden. The divine workers grew weary of endless labor, of digging canals and raising lands, and so they rebelled not with violence in this telling, but with frustration and a plea for relief. And it was Enki who offered an alternative, not destruction, not punishment, but creation, from the sacred clay of the earth, mingled with divine essence. Perhaps even the blood of a god sacrificed for the purpose, a new being would be capable of taking up the work, and perhaps, over time, becoming something more than servant. This is how humanity enters the Sumerian story, not as an accident, not as a curse, but as a deliberate act of craftsmanship and care. It invites a deeper, more calming question. Was this act simply about efficiency, or was there affection in it? To Enki, the god of wisdom, could have crafted a being that obeyed without thought, that worked without spirit. But the myths suggest something different. The humans he helped shape were curious, emotional, even rebellious. They bore traces of divinity, yes, but also the unpredictability of life itself. And that, perhaps, was the real gift, not just hands to dig, but minds to dream. In this version of the world's beginning, there is no serpent offering. Knowledge is given freely, or at least made accessible, through the same divine impulse that formed the rivers and the stars. Some interpretations of the Sumerian tablets point to Enki's fondness for humankind, to his repeated interventions on their behalf, warning them of floods, guiding them through rituals, helping them survive divine judgment. If one listens closely to these stories, there is a thread of compassion woven through the dust of myth. Could it be that we were not only made, but made with a kind of quiet love? There are clay tablets, thousands of them, etched in the ancient, cuneiform script that tell these tales in pieces, as if the full story was too large to be told in one voice. Some of them speak of genetic mixing in ways that, to modern ears, sound almost scientific divine, blood mingled with Earth's matter, a new species shaped in deliberate stages. It has led many to wonder, both scholars and dreamers alike, whether these stories were metaphors or memories. If Enki's laboratory, as some describe it, was more than myth, was it a temple, a sacred space of alchemy and experimentation? The word creation itself carries so many layers. In these ancient myths, to create was not only to assemble, but to awaken. The first humans were formed with a destiny, not merely a function. They were invited into the narrative of the gods, drawn into rituals and ceremonies, offered symbols and cycles by which to live. And as time passed, they became storytellers themselves, keepers of wisdom, mirrors of the divine. The Sumerians honored this process not just with myths, but with offerings, with ziggurats that reached toward the stars, with temples that echoed the quiet patience of the gods who once knelt in clay. And so, in this context, Enki is not simply a maker, but a mentor, a figure who stands with one foot in the mystery of the cosmos and the other in the waters of the human heart. He is the architect of potential, not perfection, and that distinction may be the most meaningful of all. To be human, then, in this ancient framework, is not to be lesser, but to be unfolding, still becoming, still echoing the impulse of a god who looked upon toil and chose to answer it with imagination. Whether one sees Enki as a deity, a symbol, or a misunderstood being from the stars, the legacy he leaves in the myths is unmistakably tender. He does not rule with thunder. He listens, he creates, he warns. And in one of the oldest stories ever written, he offers a kind of blueprint of control, but of compassion. In the hush of those early cities Uruk, Eridu, Lagashta, people left tokens of their gratitude, offerings of food, of song, of symbols carved into brick. And today, thousands of years later, we still wonder at those stories, still drawn to the idea that our beginning was not marked by punishment, but by potential. That maybe, just maybe, the divine spark within us came not only from the heavens, but from a hand that shaped us gently, from clay, from care, and from a dream of something more. The blood of kings, royal lineage, or genetic manipulation. Beneath the warm sands of Mesopotamia and hidden within the folds of clay tablets weathered by time, there lies a question older than any known empire. What truly defines a king? In the ancient Sumerian world, kingship was never just a matter of inheritance or conquest, was a sacred right, believed to be handed down from the heavens. The Sumerian King List, one of the most fascinating artifacts of early writing, opens with a phrase as mysterious as it is deliberate. After kingship descended from heaven, it was in Eridu. From that line onward, the document charts the rulers of Sumer, including many who were said to have reigned for impossibly long periods, tens of thousands of years in some cases before the Great Flood. These weren't just kings in the mortal sense, but figures who seemed to live at the border of myth and memory. The question arises, were they real? Were they symbols? Or perhaps something in between? Among scholars, the list is often interpreted as a blend of political history and mythological symbolism, a way for early civilizations to claim legitimacy by tracing their rulers back to the divine. But to others, to seekers and researchers who look through the lens of ancient astronaut theory, these kings may not have simply been divinely appointed. They may have been something far more literal, hybrids. In Sumerian mythology, particularly in texts such as the Atrahasis and the Enuma Elish, we find recurring references to divine beings interacting with humanity not only from a distance, but through direct contact, guiding, ruling, and, in some interpretations, modifying. The Anunnaki, often depicted as powerful celestial figures, are said to have played a key role in shaping early human life. Could it be that the royal lines mentioned in the King List were not only spiritually chosen, but biologically distinct? The idea might seem far-fetched at first glance, but within the ancient texts, there are whispers of rituals, initiations, and bloodlines carefully preserved across generations. These rituals often centered around the notion of divine essence, or me, tablets of destiny and cosmic order said to be held by the gods and occasionally bestowed upon mortals. Those who ruled weren't just leading their people, they were acting as intermediaries between the earthly and the celestial. The sacred oil, the ceremonial headdress, the starfall symbols of kingship weren't merely political instruments. They were signs of connection to something higher. And perhaps, just perhaps, they were reminders of a deeper inheritance passed down not only through stories, but through blood. In the mythology, there is a recurring theme of mixing the merging of divine with human, heaven with earth. The god Enki, known for his compassion and ingenuity, was said to have intervened multiple times to aid humanity, including during its creation. Could it be that this same divine hand reached into the royal lineages to shape not only civilization, but leadership itself. Some interpretations of the tablets suggest that the Anunnaki didn't just create humans as laborers, but may have experimented with different genetic templates, refining, adjusting, and eventually selecting specific lines for leadership, governance, and spiritual stewardship. The long reigns recorded in the early sections of the King List may reflect more than exaggeration. They might hint at beings who lived far longer than ordinary humans, either due to advanced knowledge, environmental differences, or, as some propose, genetic enhancements. These possibilities drift quietly between myth and science fiction, yet they continue to capture the imagination of those drawn to the blurred lines of ancient history. Consider the Egyptian pharaohs, the divine emperors of China, the Incan Sapa rulers, all of whom claimed descent from gods or celestial beings. The theme is universal, persistent, and uncomfortably consistent. Why did so many early cultures go to such lengths to tie their rulers to the stars? Were they simply asserting power through myth, or were they preserving fragments of a forgotten truth? In Mesopotamian cities like Uruk, Ur, and Nippur, where temples soared and rituals were carved into walls, the kings were more than administrators. They were spiritual symbols, embodiments of cosmic order, known as Lugal, great men, yes, but also sacred bridges between the people and the divine. This concept was reinforced in festivals like the Akitu, where the king would reenact myths of creation and renewal, often in direct imitation of the gods themselves. The king wasn't only speaking for the gods. In those sacred moments, he was the god. The performance was not mere pageantry, was considered a renewal of reality itself. This sacred theatre suggests a belief in a kind of divine continuity, a lineage not just of flesh, but of purpose. And so we return to the idea of blood not as lineage alone, but as symbol of connectivity, whether it was the color of life, the carrier of divine code, or a metaphor for sacred duty. The blood of kings was guarded, revered, and possibly even altered. Across many ancient traditions, including Mesopotamian, Indian, and Hebrew writings, we find repeated emphasis on purity of lineage. Mysterious visitors from the sky, and figures who wield knowledge far beyond the time they lived in. Were these motifs simply cultural echoes, or do they reflect a memory of something once experienced, perhaps not by all of humanity, but by a chosen few? The Sumerian tales offer no definitive answers, only clues etched in clay, buried beneath cities, and passed down in whispers. The story of the kings and their divine descent invites us not to choose between science and myth, but to listen quietly at their meeting point. In that hush, somewhere between history and wonder, a different kind of truth may emerge, not one bound by fact alone, but by the very human need to understand where we come from, why we lead, and whether somewhere in our past, our blood once carried not only dreams, but stars. The Deluge Tablet, flood stories shared by civilizations far apart. In the quiet stillness of time, long before boundaries were drawn on maps and oceans were named, there emerged a story so vast, so echoing, that it would drift gently across continents and centuries, whispered in stone, carved in clay, painted on temple walls, and carried softly through the mouths of storytellers. It is the story of the flood, the great deluge, and, among the oldest known versions of this tale, is etched into the ancient cuneiform writing of a clay tablet, known today as the Deluge Tablet, part of the larger epic of Gilgamesh, recovered from the ruins of Nineveh in the library of Ashurbanipal. This Sumerian Babylonian narrative dating back thousands of years, tells of a world once vibrant, now overtaken by divine waters, of gods who grew weary of human noise, of a chosen man named Utnapishtim, who built a vast boat, gathered animals and life, and was granted immortality after the storm had passed. But what draws us gently into the mystery is not just the power of this ancient tale, it is the soft realization that this story is not alone. Variations of this flood narrative flow like a quiet river across the ancient world, appearing in the Hebrew story of Noah in Genesis, in the Hindu scriptures with Manu and the fish avatar Matsya, in the traditions of ancient Greece through the tale of Deucalion, in the mythologies of the indigenous peoples of the Americas, Africa, and the Far East. The question that lingers calmly in the space between sleep and wakefulness is, how did such similar stories find their way into cultures separated by vast oceans and untouched by one another's breath? Could it be coincidence? A shared human memory of a local flood event magnified over time? Or does the consistency across these traditions hint at a deeper, more connected past memory so profound that it etched itself into the very structure of human storytelling? The Deluge tablet does not scream answers. Instead, it gently invites questions. It speaks not of wrath, but of renewal, not of endings, but of beginnings. The flood, while immense, does not wash away hope. It sets the stage for something new to grow. The gods of Sumer, watching from above, did not erase all life, but chose to preserve it, perhaps out of compassion, perhaps out of design. The tablet is not just a relic of mythology. It is a mirror into the ancient soul, reflecting both fear and reverence for the forces beyond comprehension. In its verses, we find not just a catastrophe, but a lesson whispered across time that human existence is fragile, cyclical, and deeply woven into the rhythms of nature and the cosmos. The boats built by Utnapishtim, by Noah, by These were not just vessels of survival, but symbols of transition, arcs not just across waters, but across epochs. Some scholars point to geological evidence of massive floods in Mesopotamia, and other regions hinting that memory and myth may have mingled long ago, giving rise to stories that became sacred. Others look to the stars and suggest that ancient visitors or events beyond natural understanding may have influenced these tales. And still, there are those who believe these stories speak to something internal, something spiritual, that each generation reinterprets anew. What remains undeniable is that the flood myth persists because it resonates. It whispers of humility before the vastness of nature, of the importance of preservation, of the enduring question of why certain knowledge was recorded and by whom. The Deluge tablet, held now in the British Museum, does not bear its message with grandeur or force. Rather, it offers its tale through worn script, chipped edges, and quiet presence. And as you close your eyes and drift through its story, you might imagine ancient hands shaping wet clay, pressing symbols with gentle precision, preserving not just a tale of water, but a thread of human wonder. In the end, the deluge is not simply a flood, it is a moment where humanity pauses, breathes, and remembers. Not all stories are meant to be explained. Some are meant to be carried, like gentle rain, across the landscape of dreams. The Tower of Babel, a language scattered by design, long before modern cities climbed toward the clouds and glass towers pierced the sky. There was said to be a structure unlike any the world had ever known, the tower not built for shelter, but for ambition, reaching up toward the heavens as if to touch the very space where gods were believed to dwell. This was the Tower of Babel, a name that has echoed softly through time, not with the clang of hammers or the shouting of laborers, but with the calm intrigue of a mystery too grand for a single answer. In ancient Mesopotamia, in the heart of what is now Iraq, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers cradle the earliest cities of human civilization, the story begins. It is told that the people of the earth, speaking one language, gathered in unity and began to build a tower in the city of Babel. The materials were simple baked, bricks and mortar, yet the dream was immense, to construct a stairway to the divine, a ziggurat that would bridge the space between human and God. But as the story continues, something curious occurs. The unity is disrupted. The language once shared by all is scattered into many. Confusion spreads, not with violence, but with separation. People can no longer understand one another, and the construction halts. The tower remains unfinished, a symbol not only of ambition, but of a moment when humanity's path took a turn toward diversity, complexity, and isolation. The Tower of Babel narrative, which appears in the Book of Genesis, has long been interpreted in theological, linguistic, and philosophical ways. Some see it as a divine act of humility, a moment when human pride was gently curbed by a higher wisdom. Others view it as a metaphor for cultural divergence, for the rise of individual languages, identities, and nations. But as we trace this story slowly through time, we find that it is not confined to one tradition alone. Similar themes appear in the Sumerian myth of Enmakar and the Lord of Arata, where the confusion of language is also attributed to a higher force intervening in human unity. And in Babylon, archaeological evidence suggests the existence of massive stepped towers, ziggurats, such as Anunnaki, whose name meant house of the foundation of heaven and earth. These structures may well have inspired or embodied the essence of the Babel myth, their towering heights mirroring the human longing to connect with something beyond the terrestrial. But deeper still, the question lingers gently. Was this story ever truly about bricks and speech, or was it always about consciousness? About the moment when humanity shifted from shared simplicity to fractured complexity? Language, after all, is not merely a tool of communication. It is a vessel of thought, a builder of worlds, a definer of reality. When people stopped speaking the same language, perhaps they did not just lose words, they lost shared dreams, collective imagination, and common understanding. And from that moment, the journey of human civilization splintered into countless paths, each with its own gods, laws, stories, and visions. From an Anunnaki perspective, the idea that ancient gods or extraterrestrial visitors played a role in human development, the Tower of Babel takes on even more layered meanings. Could it have been an early technological or symbolic attempt to re-establish contact with those who once came from the stars? Some ancient astronaut theorists wonder whether the act of confusing the languages was not simply metaphorical, but an intentional design to slow or fragment humanity's progress, to ensure that no single unified voice could rise to challenge or connect with those higher beings. Whether seen as divine intervention, symbolic myth, or historical allegory, the tale's endurance reveals something fundamental about the human spirit, a desire to reach upward, to know more, to unify and expand, yet it also carries the soft reminder that progress without wisdom and ambition without harmony may falter. The tower's ruins, never truly found, remain as much within us as around us, a quiet symbol of what was almost achieved and what was gently withheld. In sleep, as your mind floats between thoughts and dreams, You may imagine this tower not as bricks, but as a spiral of voices, each one echoing a language once shared, now scattered across the earth like seeds in the wind. And perhaps, if we listen closely enough, not with ears, but with memory and imagination, we might still hear the faint resonance of that one original voice that once unified. All it is not gone. It rests calmly beneath the layers of history and silence, waiting. The disappearance, why did the Anunnaki leave? Or did they? There is a silence in the ancient record, a gentle gap where the presence of the Anunnaki once lingered like the soft echo of a whisper across time. These beings described in Sumerian texts as gods, but interpreted by some as something far older or perhaps otherworldly, appear for a time in the early chapters of human history, involved in creation myths, governance, architecture, agriculture, and even genetic shaping. And then, slowly, their names begin to fade from the tablets, their temples crumble, their symbols are eroded by wind and war, and their stories drift into allegory. But the question remains, why did they leave, or did they ever truly leave at all? For those who study these myths as metaphors, their disappearance marks a shift in human consciousness from divine dependence to human agency, from mythic instruction to rational exploration. But for others, those who consider the possibility that these beings were not gods in the spiritual sense, but travelers from elsewhere, perhaps from the stars, from another dimension, or from a civilization far older than we understand their withdrawal raises deeper questions. Was their mission completed? Was their presence no longer required? Or were they forced to retreat due to internal conflict, changes in planetary conditions, or choices made by humanity itself? The story of the Anunnaki is not confined to one myth or one land. Their echoes appear in Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian traditions. Over time, their personas merge with new names, new gods, and new meanings. Enki becomes Ea, Anu becomes a distant sky father. The clear lines between creator, ruler, and visitor begin to blur. But the pattern is the same. Divine beings once walked among humans or were believed to and then withdrew. In many texts, there are hints. The deluge, for example, is said to have reshaped the earth and its inhabitants. The Watchers, who may have been agents or cousins of the Anunnaki, fell from grace and were punished, leading to a change in cosmic order. And in some writings, there is mention of a return, not in fire or glory, but in a reawakening, a reconnection, a time when the gods will again walk among men not as overlords, but as reminders of a forgotten past. Some theorists suggest their departure was more of a veiling than a vanishing, that the Anunnaki moved from physical presence to symbolic resonance, from walking in cities to dwelling in texts, from building ziggurats to whispering through dreams. Others point to alignments in ancient sites, astronomical calendars, and unexplained genetic markers, wondering if they left traces not only in stone but in our very DNA. Could their departure have been an illusion? Might their influence simply have evolved into more subtle forms, guiding thought, shaping myth, planting ideas that would blossom centuries later in science, spirituality, and curiosity? And if they did leave, where did they go? Some texts mention Nibiru, a mysterious planet or realm associated with their origin. But is Nibiru a location in space, or a metaphor for a state of being beyond ordinary perception? Could it be that the Anunnaki withdrew not into the stars, but into hidden frequencies of thought, into dimensions layered just outside of waking reality? Even today, in quiet moments, artists, inventors, and seekers across cultures speak of inspiration as if it were delivered, not invented, but received. Some wonder if those ancient minds who taught us how to write, plant, measure, and build did not vanish, but instead became the silent muses of human progress. Their fingerprints may not be just on ancient clay tablets, but on the soul of humanity itself. So as we consider their disappearance, let us do so not with finality, but with wonder. The sky still watches, the earth still holds memories, and the stories, when told softly and slowly, seem to open doors not just to the past, but to something gently waiting beyond it. Perhaps the Anunnaki have never been farther than the quiet between our thoughts, the pause between stars, the breath between one question and the next. The Nibiru enigma, lost planet or metaphor for return. Among the most whispered legends that drift through the dust of ancient Mesopotamia is that of Nibiru, a word that has crossed centuries with the quiet persistence of a forgotten star, carrying with it more questions than answers, more meaning than clarity. Nibiru, as described in Babylonian and Sumerian texts, was not merely a planet, it was a presence, a symbol, a motion in the heavens that connected divine fate with earthly transformation. In some translations, it is referred to as the planet of crossing, suggesting either a celestial body with an unusual orbit or perhaps a realm of transition, a place or concept that moves between states, between dimensions, or even between times. For the ancient stargazers of the Fertile Crescent, Nibiru wasn't a mystery in isolation. It belonged to a wider tapestry of cosmic alignment, sacred order, and divine timing. They looked at the skies not with curiosity alone, but with reverence, as though the stars and their movements echoed stories already known in the soul. Nibiru was often associated with the god Marduk, a figure of power and balance, who, in some myths, reorders the cosmos and establishes dominion over the heavens and the earth. In this light, Nibiru may have been more than a place, may have been the symbolic chariot of divine arrival, the path by which order returns to chaos, or the mirror in the sky reflecting the rise and fall of human civilizations. And yet, in modern interpretations often controversial and debated, Nibiru has taken on a new face. Some theorists have proposed that Nibiru is a literal planet, perhaps still hidden from astronomical instruments, with a vast elliptical orbit that takes thousands of years to complete. According to this view, its approach may once have coincided with major changes on Earth's massive floods, shifts in weather, sudden leaps in culture and language, all gently pointing to a guiding hand from beyond. The ancient Sumerians, with their surprising knowledge of celestial mechanics, described planetary arrangements that modern science would only verify millennia later. How did they know? Could the myths of Nibiru's return be memories encoded into poetry and preserved through repetition? And if Nibiru is not merely a distant world, but a metaphor, what then is it meant to teach us? Perhaps Nibiru represents the return of wisdom, the realignment of human life with cosmic rhythms. In some readings, its crossing is not about the sky at all, but about human awareness, a shift in consciousness, a reawakening. Just as the Anunnaki are said to have walked among early humans, teaching, guiding, shaping. Perhaps Nibiru is the signal of their re-entry, not through ships or flames, but through thought, understanding, remembrance. The metaphor grows deeper when we consider that many ancient cultures describe cyclical ages, periods of forgetting followed by periods of remembering. The Golden Age, the fall, the return. Within this rhythm, Nibiru may be the name given to the silent turning point. Between sleep and awakening, between exile and homecoming. The slow arc of its movement could mirror the slow return of humanity to something it once knew: harmony with the earth, understanding of the heavens, and the humility to stand in awe of both. For others, the word Nibiru inspires caution. It has been linked to doomsday theories, misunderstood predictions, and speculative fear. But in the gentle tone of ancient stories, there is no urgency, only observation. The stars rise and fall. The world changes in its own time, and what returns does so not to destroy, but to remind, to suggest that what was lost may still be found, not in the sky alone, but in the ancient memories we carry. As we lay beneath the same sky our ancestors once studied, the idea of Nibiru invites a quieter question: what in us still waits to return? What knowledge lies hidden, not in distant planets, but in our stories, our languages, our dreams? If Nibiru is a crossing point, then perhaps we are already on the bridge, neither lost in the past nor certain of the future, but held in the quiet middle, remembering not only who we are, but what we once believed the stars were trying to say. And maybe that message has never been about fear or mystery, but about rhythm, return, and rediscovery. So, as we gently explore the enigma of Nibiru, let us not rush toward answers. Let us float, for a moment, in the mystery between what we see and what we feel, between the clay tablets and the distant sky, between the silence of the stars and the soft voice that still calls from them. Ancient flight were wings, a symbol, or technology, in the soft shadows of temple walls and the delicate grooves of stone carvings from millennia ago. There exists a motif, both beautiful and puzzling, the image of wings, not merely on birds or celestial beings, but on figures said to have descended from the skies, walked among kings, and offered gifts that changed the fate of humanity. In Mesopotamian art, the Anunnaki are often shown adorned with great feathered wings, each plume detailed with care, as if flight were not just a metaphor for divinity, but a remembered trait, a real characteristic. Throughout ancient cultures, the idea of beings who came from the skies was not rare. It was repeated with variation, but remarkable consistency, from the gods of Sumer and Akkad to the deities of ancient Egypt, from the feathered serpent of Mesoamerican lore to the flying Vimanas of Hindu epics. The sky was not just a place of weather and stars, it was a realm of beings who came and went with purpose. Were these wings a poetic symbol of transcendence, meant to elevate divine figures above the realm of men? Or were they clues, passed down through generations, of a misunderstood form of technologies, something our ancestors could see but not explain in terms we would now recognize? In the quiet mystery of the past, symbolism and reality often wove themselves together in seamless patterns. The myth of Daedalus and Icarus, for instance, speaks of man-made wings and a failed attempt to touch the sun, not just as a warning, but perhaps as a cultural echo of aspirations long before modern flight. In South America's Nazca lines, vast shapes carved into the desert depict birds, animals, and long runways best viewed from the air, yet no known culture of that time had the capability for flight. In Egyptian tombs, curious models shaped like birds have been found, their proportions strangely aerodynamic, as though inspired by more than mere imagination. And across Assyrian reliefs and Babylonian seals, we find depictions of gods or watchers descending from the heavens, sometimes aboard what appear to be complex mechanisms, platforms, or orbs, or thrones in motion, each detailed with astonishing mechanical precision. For ancient people, to soar must have seemed like the ultimate proof of divine nature. But what if it was simply something they had witnessed, a technology they could not replicate, only revere? Could the wings carved into stone be interpretations of propulsion systems, gliders, or protective suits? Could flight, in its earliest stories, be the memory of encounters not with metaphorical gods, but with travelers from elsewhere across the sky, or perhaps across time? In the Hindu Vedas, the Vimanas are described not just as flying chariots, but with dimensions, battle capabilities, even fuel sources details, strangely specific for what is usually dismissed as myth. Similarly, Sumerian texts do not shy away from describing the skies as active spaces, places of travel, control, and observation. The Anunnaki are said to have moved between realms, and certain gods, like Enlil or Uto, were called lords of the sky, operating from the heavens with ease and familiarity. These descriptions were not random. They were consistent, reverent, and enduring. Yet the mystery remains gentle, not demanding belief, but inviting wonder. Even in Greek and Roman traditions, the concept of wings extended to messengers, Hermes with his winged sandals, delivering knowledge between gods and mortals. Was this simply allegory for the speed of thought? Or was it a way of remembering technology, now lost devices, that allowed swift movement across distance, between realms of experience? It is comforting to consider that wings have always symbolized aspiration, freedom, and transition. They lift the mind as well as the body. But in the silent halls of ancient ruins, where dust coats inscriptions and time dulls stone, there may still be remnants of a time when wings were more than metaphor. Perhaps they pointed to tools, crafts, or machines left behind, or to moments of contact, briefly shared between those who walked and those who flew. Today, we understand. Lift, thrust, and drag. We've harnessed principles once thought to belong only to birds and dreams. But our ancestors, with fewer words and less certainty, may have watched something rise into the sky and, in awe, given it feathers in their art, reverence in their prayers, and permanence in their myths. And in those long-ago nights, under stars, just as quiet as ours, they may have whispered stories of beings with wings, not angels, not metaphors, but real visitors, who came and went on winds not their own, leaving behind only wonder, awe, and the faint memory of flight. Myths mirror myths. Are all gods the same visitors in disguise? Across the gentle sands of time and the slow-turning pages of forgotten texts, humanity has carried a remarkable truth wrapped in countless names and stories that across every culture, on every continent, from the earliest cave etchings to the first written word, tales of powerful beings descending from the sky, guiding, teaching, and shaping civilizations emerge again and again, almost as if echoing each other, through veils of distance and translation. These gods, these celestial figures, are draped in different robes, worshipped in foreign tongues, and painted in local symbols, yet at their core they seem to share eerie similarities. In Sumer, the Anunnaki walked among kings. In Egypt, the Nibiru ruled with radiant might. In India, the Devas danced through the skies in golden Vima. The Greeks spoke of the Olympians, perched atop their ethereal mountain, often meddling in human affairs. The Norse believed in the Aesir, skyborn warriors wielding thunder and foresight, and the Mayans whispered of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent who descended from the heavens to share wisdom. These stories, born from civilizations separated by oceans and mountains, all tell of a time when knowledge and architecture leaped forward mysteriously, often following the arrival of these beings. Could these parallels be coincidence, a byproduct of the universal human imagination? Or do they hint at something more, something singular, remembered through different cultural lenses, names, and rituals? The gods came from the sky. They often had great power, advanced tools, and a mission that wasn't always understood. They promised order, sometimes demanded loyalty, and almost always left as suddenly as they arrived. When we compare the Anunnaki to the Nibiru, or the Devas to the Olympians, the lines between them begin to blur it in their personalities or myths, but in their role, custodians of early human development. Even the stories of rebellion and divine war, like the Anunnaki's division, the fall of Lucifer, or the cosmic battles in Hindu mythology, paint a familiar picture, a rift among the powerful, often resulting in exile, banishment, or a renewed era for mankind. It is as if the same drama was observed from different angles by different peoples, each assigning their own language and symbolism to the same celestial stage. In the carvings of Assyrian temples, we see beings with wings and tools, sometimes standing before what resemble machines or portals. In the myths of the Dogon people of Mali, Africa, there are accounts of beings who came from Sirius B, a star, invisible to the naked eye until modern times. In South America, Viracocha emerged from the sea, taught the people agriculture and engineering, then vanished into the horizon. These gods are not just worshipped, they are remembered like visitors, whose visits stirred the hearts and minds of entire civilizations, and their influence always coincided with leaps in human development, the sudden appearance of writing, city planning, laws, astronomy, and advanced mathematics. Why do ancient myths, created by people who never met and likely never even heard of one another, follow the same arc? Is it possible that these stories were seeded from a common origin? Or, perhaps, more wondrously, that the same beings appeared to many, changing only the surface of their presence to align with local customs and symbols? Could it be that the pantheon of gods, be they Anunnaki, Devas, Nibiru, or otherwise, all masks worn by the same source, cloaked in mystery and time? As we rest under the same stars that once lit the paths of those ancient storytellers, we may begin to feel the gentle tug of connection between myths once thought separate. Perhaps they are not separate at all, but braided threads in one great cosmic tapestry. And maybe, just maybe, what we call gods, angels, or sky beings were never figments of imagination, but recollections distorted over time, but born from real encounters. As the winds of history whisper through temples, tombs, and tablets, they ask us not to believe blindly, but to wonder quietly. If so many civilizations remember skywalkers, is it because they dreamed them into being, or because they never truly left? Egyptian skyboats, the Ra of another realm, in the quiet deserts of ancient Egypt, where the sands hold whispers older than memory. A story unfolds through hieroglyphs and stone, a tale of divine boats that sailed not across water, but the sky. The ancient Egyptians, one of the most spiritually rich civilizations in history, believed deeply in the journey of the soul. And at the center of this belief was Ra, the sun god, who each day sailed across the heavens in a great solar bark, and each night descended into the underworld to battle darkness before rising again. These skyboats, or solar ships, were not mere mythic metaphors to the ancients, but intricately described vessels, often depicted with wings, sails, and divine passengers, suggesting more than simple storytelling, they may have recorded, something they genuinely witnessed or imagined with startling precision. The most famous of these is the Khufu ship, discovered buried beside the Great Pyramid of Giza in a pit sealed so perfectly it remained intact for over 4,000 years. This cedar vessel, constructed with masterful skill and no nails, was not meant for water, had never touched a river. Instead, it seemed destined for the skies or the stars. A ceremonial craft, perhaps, intended to carry Pharaoh Khufu in his afterlife, not just across realms of the dead, but through the cosmic ocean above. But why would a culture so grounded in the earthly cycle of the Nile imagine their gods and kings journeying in flying ships? Some scholars suggest that these tales were symbolic metaphors for the sun's passage or for rebirth, but others wonder if they stemmed from something deeper, faint cultural memory of aerial travel, of visitors who came not from the ground but from the sky. In many temple walls we see carved figures standing before what resemble capsules or pods, sometimes emitting rays, often associated with stars. The ceiling of the temple of Dendara, for example, displays celestial boats surrounded by winged discs, beings with strange tools, and even what some interpret as early depictions of flight. If these were only religious expressions, their consistency and detail across dynasties and regions remain remarkable. Egyptian mythology tells us that Ra created himself, then emerged from the primordial waters in a golden boat illuminating the void. This golden vessel, according to some texts, could navigate both the sky and the netherworld, suggesting multi-dimensional travel, or at least an understanding of realms beyond physical reach. Ra's daily battle with Apophis, the serpent of chaos during his nightly descent through the underworld mirrors myths from other cultures, like the Norse sun chariot escaping wolves, or the Sumerian journeys of divine sky beings. Could it be that Razbark was more than a mythological image, that it represented an ancient understanding of celestial movement, or even actual aerial observation? As with many ancient mysteries, the line between imagination and memory begins to blur when we consider how isolated civilizations arrived at similar myths about flying vessels and sky-traveling deities. Egyptian priests were not only spiritual leaders, but mathematicians, engineers, and astronomers. Their understanding of star alignments, planetary movement, and timekeeping was astonishingly advanced. Temples like Abu Simbel, constructed to light only on specific days of the solar year, and pyramids aligned with Orion's belt, suggest a deep and intentional knowledge of the skies. So when they spoke of Ra's boats sailing the heavens, perhaps they weren't describing a fantasy, but rather a cosmic router path mapped long ago by those who came from the stars. Even the rituals around burial often involved recreating this journey. Tombs were designed as launch chambers for the soul, with painted ceilings showing constellations and symbolic vessels ready to carry the deceased into eternity. Perhaps these weren't just metaphors for death, but echoes of an experience humanity once had, watching something ascend, vanish, or return from the unknown above. The depictions of the gods, tutel beings with animal heads, radiant crowns, and otherworldly postures, don't just suggest spiritual abstraction, but possibly a way to depict something not of this earth, using the closest imagery the people had. In some tales, Ra is not alone in his skyboat. He is joined by Thoth, Mat, and Horosol, of whom have associations with knowledge, order, and protection. These passengers read less like a religious ensemble and more like a crew. Perhaps what we interpret as myth was in fact a cultural transmission of profound encounters. Perhaps the skyboats of Egypt tell a tale of humanity's early brushes with something vast and unknowns, something that hovered above, observed, and maybe even guided from the stars. As we drift beneath the same stars that once inspired such wonder, we're left with a gentle, unspoken question. Were the gods truly gods, or were they visitors traveling not just through belief, but through air, light, and time? Maya, Olmec, and the cosmic visitors, twin serpents in the sky, in the still silence of Mesoamerican jungles, buried beneath layers of moss and time, rest the once vibrant cities of the Maya and the Olmec civilizations that watched the stars. With reverence, built structures aligned with constellations, and carved stories into stone that whisper of beings from the sky. Among their myths, symbols, and architectural wonders, there exists a quiet, repeating motif: the twin serpents. Not just snakes, but feathered serpents who moved between heaven and earth. Guardians of knowledge, symbols of arrival and ascension. The Olmec, the oldest of these cultures, left behind colossal stone heads, enigmatic, precise, and facing skyward as if honoring or awaiting something from above. Their jade carvings, celestial maps, and figures with helmet-like features have led many to wonder if their knowledge came from a source not bound to this earth. The Maya, arriving centuries later, inherited and expanded on this legacy, building city-states like Palenque, Tikal, and Chichen Itza, places where time was measured by the heavens and where gods descended not in metaphor, but in carefully detailed accounts. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god, is described in Mesoamerican texts not just as divine, but as a bringer of civilization, language, and agriculture, a sky being who arrived across the sea and left, promising to return. In temple friezes and codices he is often shown emerging from the mouth of a serpent or flying through the sky surrounded by flames or stars. What exactly were these serpents, and why were they always tied to the sky? Some scholars view them as symbolic representations of comets, the Milky Way, or solar deities. Yet others sense something more: the possibility that these myths preserved a faint poetic memory of contact with skyborne visitors. At Palenque, the famous sarcophagus lid of King Pakal shows the ruler in a reclining pose, surrounded by symbols many interpret as celestial: a cross-shaped tree of life, stars, and what resembles a control panel or propulsion system beneath him. While mainstream archaeology sees this as spiritual rebirth imagery, others have speculated about its uncanny resemblance to a spacecraft. The Maya knew more about astronomy than nearly any other ancient people. Their calendars, including the famed long count, tracked planetary movements with astonishing precision, even predicting eclipses centuries ahead. Why did such early cultures focus so deeply on the sky, not just for agriculture, but spiritually and structurally? Many of their temples align with solstices and equinoxes, and some, like El Castillo at Chichen Itza, cast serpent-like shadows during the equinox, as though the architecture itself is participating in a cosmic dance. This serpent motif also appears in the Olmec's La Venta artifacts, where twin serpents surround figures holding what seem to be objects of power, and in Maya glyphs, which show serpents with humanoid faces emerging from their jaws, perhaps suggesting transformation or duality, beings, both human and something more. The Maya believed the sky was layered, a multi-tiered realm traversed by gods and ancestors alike. The Milky Way was seen as the Wakachan, a celestial serpent or world tree bridging the heavens and the earth. Were these layers merely religious belief, Or did they reflect an intuitive understanding of dimensions or realms beyond ordinary perception? It's notable that these ideas mirror those of faraway cultures like the Sumerians, who also spoke of sky gods, multi-layered heavens, and serpent beings. Across oceans and time, the image of a serpent in the sky, wisting, descending, revealing. Knowledge recurs with uncanny consistency. Did the Maya and Olmec see something, or remember something, that inspired this mythological precision? Or were they interpreting natural phenomena in ways our modern minds have forgotten how to feel? When we walk through the ruins, today when we stand atop Temple 4 and look out over the canopy, the stars still shining in patterns once worshipped, we feel a strange echo. The silence is deep, but not empty. These civilizations may be gone, but their questions still hang in the sky like constellations, waiting to be reread. Their art, their myths, their temples, they speak softly of serpents with feathers, of visitors with gifts, and of a time when heaven and earth weren't so far apart. As we drift into rest beneath our own modern sky, we might wonder, what did the Maya and Olmec see when they looked up? And what truths did they encode in the stone that only the stars could understand? India's Vimanas, a shared story in different skies. In the ancient texts of India, where mythology and metaphysics softly merge, there exists a curious narrative, one not shouted, but quietly preserved in verses, diagrams, and temple carvings, that speaks of machines which flew not in imagination alone, but in the skies of a time now veiled by age. These machines, called Vimanas, appear in the epics Mahabharata and Ramayana, as well as in older texts like the Vimanaka Shastra, not as poetic metaphors, but as structured, described, and even piloted crafts, described with domes, propulsion, systems, and navigational controls. These flying chariots were said to traverse the skies, carry warriors, and sometimes even move between worlds. The Mahabharata tells of battles where Vimanas moved with agility, casting beams of light and shifting in and out of visibility, while other texts speak of vertical takeoffs and landings, and of pilots trained not only in physical techniques, but in mental concentration, suggesting a merging of technology and consciousness. The ancient Sanskrit word Vimana initially meant palace or temple, often in the heavens, but evolved in usage to describe a vehicle of the gods, a structure that moved with purpose through the air, not floated, but flew. In calm contemplation, we begin to wonder, were these merely the dreams of a spiritually rich culture, or records of something once observed, retold across generations with reverence rather than disbelief? Some scholars point to allegory, symbols of spiritual ascent, while others note the technical language in texts like the Samarangana Sutradhara, which outlines mechanical construction, fire-resistant materials, and guidance systems, concepts, seemingly ahead of their time. The temples of India, especially those carved in stone during the Chola and Vijayanagara periods, show tiered towers with aerodynamic symmetry, and within, murals and carvings hint at sky vehicles, often positioned beside gods and sages. Were these illustrations symbolic, or memory encoded in art? The Vaimanika Shastra, a controversial and debated manuscript, details propulsion systems involving mercury, gyroscopes, and solar energy ideas that find uncanny echoes in modern theoretical physics and aerospace design, even if the document itself lacks historical consensus. As we explore these possibilities, not with judgment, but with gentle curiosity, we find that the story of flying craft is not unique to India. Rather, Similar stories ripple softly through other ancient cultures, from the skyboats of Egypt to the thunderbirds of Native America and the feathered serpents of Mesoamerica. Could it be that different civilizations, separated by continents, but connected by wonder, saw or sensed the same presence in the skies and interpreted it through the lens of their own language, art, and faith? India's Vimanas, then, become not an isolated myth, but part of a global whisper, one that speaks of beings who came from above, not in conquest, but often as teachers, watchers, or silent companions to human evolution. The yogic practices, described alongside Vimanas, often involve inner stillness, control of breath, and access to higher realms, suggesting that these crafts may not have been purely physical, but energetic vehicles, two merging form and mind. In dreams, people across millennia have described flight, the weightless sensation of rising toward the stars. And perhaps these shared human visions stem from something deeper, something ancestral, some moment when flight was not just a metaphor, but a memory. As we lie back and allow these ideas to settle gently, not to prove or disprove, but simply to listen, the skies above seem a little older, and the stories told beneath them a little more connected. The Vimanas, silent now but once described, in vibrant detail, offer not just technological mystery, but a reflection on humanity's enduring desire to reach upward, not only with machines, but with meaning. And in that upward gaze, in that echo of skyward longing, perhaps the truest mystery is not whether we were visited, but why the story keeps returning, again and again, across all cultures, with wings shaped differently, but always pointing to the same quiet sky. The Dogon and Sirius B knowledge beyond their time. In the gentle hills and arid plateaus of Mali, where the land breathes quietly beneath the stars, lives a people whose stories are older than most written records, whispered through generations, not with ink, but with voice, symbol, and ritual. The Dogon, a deeply spiritual and astronomically attuned people, have long observed the sky not only with their eyes, but with an intimate awareness that seems to echo something ancient, something almost impossible. For among their rich mythology exists knowledge of the Sirius star system that has puzzled modern scholars for decades, specifically the existence of Sirius B, a white dwarf companion to the brilliant Sirius A, invisible to the naked eye and only confirmed by Western science in the 20th century. Yet, the Dogon have spoken of it for centuries, describing it as a tiny yet incredibly heavy star, revolving around its larger twin in a set orbital period with surprising accuracy. They say it is the seat of one of their creator gods, and its influence is central to their origin myths. But how did they know this, long before telescopes made such distant bodies detectable? The Dogon elders tell of the Namo beings who came from the sky in a spinning vessel, bringing knowledge, language, agriculture, and order. The Namo are described as amphibious, part fish, part human, descending from Sirius and gifting cosmic awareness to humankind. It is easy, and perhaps more comfortable, to view such tales through the lens of metaphor, and yet, when taken alongside the precision of the Dogon's astronomical understanding, not just of Sirius B, but also the rings of Saturn, the moons of Jupiter, and the heliocentric model, we are left not with answers, but with a gentle tension between what we think we know and what we might have forgotten. Their ceremonies, like the Sugui festival, align with celestial events occurring in 60-year cycles, echoing movements of stars unseen by the unaided eye. Their sacred caves are adorned with symbols that seem to mirror astronomical patterns, and their oral histories carry mathematical and cosmological ideas woven through myth and meaning. These are not the ramblings of coincidence, but the architecture of an inherited memory, held carefully in rituals and respect. Some suggest that this knowledge came through trade, cultural diffusion, or distant observation, while others pause to wonder if the Dogon preserved something humanity once widely knew, only to lose it to time. Their story is not alone. Around the world, ancient cultures appear to hold fragmented pieces of a cosmic puzzle, from the star maps of Aboriginal Australia to the celestial alignments of the Maya. But in the case of the Dogon, what sets their narrative apart is its clarity, its consistency, and its rootedness in everyday life. The knowledge of Sirius B was not an abstraction for them. It was part of who they were, part of how they planted, danced, and dreamed. As we lie beneath our own starry skies tonight, it is humbling to think that a people without modern instruments may have looked up and seen more clearly than we do today, not because of technology, but because of a kind of listening we have forgotten. Perhaps, in the slow rhythm of oral tradition and the deep respect for the cosmos, there lies a form of knowledge transmission as valid and as vital as any telescope or satellite. The Dogon remind us that mystery does not always arrive with spectacle. Sometimes it sits quietly in the corner of a village, in the painted wall of a shrine, in the cadence of a story passed from grandparent to child. Their connection to Sirius B, whether interpreted as ancestral myth, ancient contact, or symbolic resonance, challenges the linear narratives of progress and opens a doorway to softer possibilities. What if knowledge can be remembered, not learned? What if looking up is not about discovery, but about recognition? In the calm of the Dogon night, where stars shimmer above mud brick homes and the air carries the songs of ages, perhaps there is something we can still learn, not just about the universe, but about ourselves and the way we once listened to it with more than our eyes. The Nephilim, the biblical cousins of the Anunnaki, in the quiet pages of ancient scripture and whispered across forgotten tablets. A curious and often debated group of beings emerges, figures known as the Nephilim. The very word stirs an old and gentle intrigue, echoing softly through time as it drifts from the verses of the Book of Genesis and flows gently into the mythology of many, described as giants, or sometimes as the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. Their presence feels less like a moment in history and more like a riddle left between the lines, waiting patiently to be unraveled. The Nephilim appear suddenly in early chapters of religious text, not with thunder or fury, but with quiet mystery, as if gently suggesting that the world once held secrets too vast for modern minds to quickly interpret. Some see them as divine watchers who fell, others as hybrid figures, a blend of celestial and earthly lineage, neither fully one nor the other. And when the name Anunnaki rises in other traditions, in lands older than the Bible itself, it feels as if distant echoes are responding to each other across cultures. While the Anunnaki are carved into clay in the Sumerian records as mighty figures descending from the heavens, the Nephilim are spoken of in biblical passages with both awe and caution. Could these two traditions be remembering the same presence, each through the lens of their own time and understanding? Or do they merely reflect a human longing to explain what once felt unexplainably, bridge between sky and soil, between the seen and the unseen? There is a calm and ancient stillness in how these names persist, how they pass from storyteller to scholar, how they linger not in shouts but in gentle speculation. The tales do not demand belief. Instead, they invite reflection, allowing one to drift slowly through layers of thought like a soft descent through mist. Whether symbolic or literal, myth or memory, the Nephilim remain like distant stars in a night sky, visible only when the world becomes quiet enough to wonder. And as the Anunnaki loom tall in tablets and myth, the Nephilim mirror them softly in scripture, as if two ancient voices still speak, not in opposition, but in harmony, each singing in their own tongue about a time when the heavens and the earth once met. Göbekli Tepe, minus 12,000-year-old memory frozen in stone, in the quiet hills of southeastern Turkey, where the sun casts long shadows over the dry earth and the wind carries the scent of ancient dust, lies a site so old and so intricately carved that it gently unsettles our sense of time. Göbekli Tepe, a sanctuary built 12,000 years ago, long before writing, agriculture, or even the cities that would eventually rise and fall in the cradle of civilization, resting beneath layers of soil until its rediscovery in the late 20th century. This place made not of scattered rocks, but towering T-shaped pillars arranged in sacred circles, whispers a tale from a time before time, when early humans gathered not just for survival, but perhaps for wonder. The smooth surfaces of these massive stones, some reaching nearly 20 feet in height and weighing tons, bear delicate carvings of foxes, serpents, boars, and birds, etched not in haste, but with reverence, as if to record a language not spoken, but felt. There are no graves here, no signs of ordinary living, no homes, no tools of daily life, only circles of stone that face the stars, aligned to the sky, and to something deeper within. Archaeologists study and gently theorize, suggesting this was a ceremonial center, a place where humans may have first asked questions about the world beyond the visible. And yet, even these interpretations float in uncertainty, because the site's very existence predates the tools and organization once thought necessary for such construction. How did people who had not yet tamed crops or written symbols coordinate the building of megaliths, this grand, who guided their hands, and what stories did they tell as they moved stone and spirit alike? Some suggest divine inspiration, others propose ancient memory and echo from a forgotten age when knowledge moved differently. Not written in scrolls, but preserved in collective ritual and carved into permanence. Göbekli Tepe was not simply abandoned. It was deliberately buried, covered in soil as though it had served its purpose or was meant to be hidden, to be preserved for another era's rediscovery. This act of burial, as mysterious as the site itself, feels almost ceremonial, a closing of a chapter we never knew had opened. And so it sat quietly for thousands of years, beneath shepherds' feet and grazing flocks, holding its silence through centuries of wind, weather, and waiting. Today, as we uncover its stones and try to read their meanings, we do not awaken a forgotten city, but rather approach a memory one not written in history books, but in something older and more human. Göbekli Tepe is not a puzzle to be solved quickly, but a gentle reminder that even in the earliest dawn of our species, we were already reaching for the sky, already wondering, already carving our questions in stone for someone far in the future to find, to feel, and perhaps to understand. Stone circles, stars, and symbols, ancient GPS for the divine. Across quiet meadows, misty highlands, and windswept plains scattered throughout the world, stone circles rise silently from the earth, worn by time but never truly forgotten. These ancient arrangements of standing stones like Stonehenge in England, Nabta Playa in Egypt, and countless lesser-known circles stretching from Scotland to Sardinia carry a quiet, consistent mystery that refuses to fade. No one knows for certain why they were built or how their creators, with no modern tools or technology, managed such precision in placement, orientation, and alignment. Yet when we stand before them, whether beneath a grey dawn or a night sky full of stars, we feel their presence, calm, persistent, and steeped in purpose. Each circle seems to hum with a timeless rhythm, a geometry that whispers through the ages without ever speaking aloud. Many align perfectly with the movements of the heavens, the rising and setting of the sun during solstices, the phases of the moon, the positioning of particular stars or constellations at significant times of year. Some stones are shaped like doorways, others like markers or guides. Their shadows stretch and fall with the changing light, forming patterns across the grass that seem almost deliberate. Was this early astronomy a calendar etched into the land for those who watched the skies with awe? Or was it something deep, sacred geometry designed not merely to track the cosmos, but to call upon it, to mirror the order of the universe on earth and perhaps invite harmony, blessing, or understanding from beyond? For the builders of these circles, sky and stone were not separate. They were part of the same language, an ongoing dialogue between earth and the heavens. Their symbols, carved spirals, grooves, and cup marks speak to this unity. We do not know what these marks meant, yet their repetition across continents suggests a shared idea that symbols could serve as maps, not of terrain, but of meaning. A kind of ancient GPS, not guiding travelers across space, but guiding spirit through time, helping communities orient themselves to something greater than their immediate surroundings. Perhaps they were places of gathering, of ritual, of quiet, watching where generations would pass down the stories of stars and ancestors alike. Perhaps they were constructed to welcome seasonal changes with reverence, or to trace celestial visitors whose cycles took years or centuries to complete. Or perhaps they were places to simply be still where one could listen to the turning sky and feel part of something infinite and repeating. The mystery deepens when we realize how many stone circles lie on the same latitudes, or seem to align with distant sites, as if they were part of a greater global network now forgotten. Did early humans travel, exchange ideas, or tune into similar rhythms of thought independently across continents? That unity of vision suggests something more profound than coincidence. It suggests remembrance. And now, millennia later, we return to these circles not with offerings or chants, but with questions. We walk among the stones, slowly, carefully, feeling the weight of time and the softness of wonder. Even in silence, the stones speak of time that flows differently, of people who looked up and saw more than stars, of builders who felt the land breathe and tried to echo its pulse in standing form. These circles, though broken or incomplete, are not ruins. They are reminders, gentle, enduring, and still standing. They invite us to slow down, to look up, and to feel once more the quiet truth that perhaps our ancestors understood so well. That between the earth beneath us and the sky above us lies a sacred space, and we are always moving through it. The echo in myth, did civilizations dream the same dream? Across the gentle rise and fall of human history, long before the hum of modern life, there exists a curious harmony, distant cultures, unconnected by roads or rivers, whispering remarkably. Similar stories of sky-born beings, great floods, sacred mountains, and cosmic cycles. This resonance of myth is not an echo of conquest or trade, but something softer, something that suggests the ancient mind moved as one through the dreamscape of origin, seeking to explain the unknown in remarkably parallel ways. In Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki walked among early city builders. In India, the Devas glided through golden Vimanas, In Egypt, Ra traversed the heavens in solar barges. In Mesoamerica, the feathered serpent brought knowledge from beyond. And in West Africa, the Dogon spoke with precision of stars unnamed by any telescope of their age. Each of these tales stands alone in its setting: the reed huts of Sumer beneath the pyramids of Giza, within the jungle-cloaked temples of the Maya. On the stone circles of Europe, but listen more closely, and you hear the same soft question: where did we come from, and who taught us to reach for the sky? These civilizations, separated by oceans and centuries, seem to converge in their dreams of contact with powers beyond themselves, as if memory of a shared moment slipped into myth, carried on the winds that brush every shore. They sang of creation, not as random chance, but as deliberate design. They spoke of divine law handed to mortals. They marked the passage of the sun and stars with temples and calendars precise enough to rival our own. How could they, without telescopes, imagine Sirius B, or map equinoxes with such accuracy, or carve serpents into stone that align with celestial patterns only visible when light and shadow dance at just the right moment? Perhaps, in their softest moments, by firelight or under the hush of dawn, our ancestors remembered a dream man. Encounter when sky and earth were close, when guidance arrived not in wind or rain, but in revelation. This dream did not belong to one land, but to the human soul itself, whispering that we are not as separate as we believe, that our stories are threads in one vast tapestry, woven by hands we cannot name, across fields too wide for any single voice. In the echo of myth we find not conflict, but connection, flood legends that ripple from the Tigris to the Nile to the Ganges, mountain temples that mirror ziggurats, winged beings seen in carvings from Catalhayek to Chichen Itza, and laws whispered to kings from tablets of clay, all hinting that humanity once shared a single spark of wonder and awe. And though time has stretched us into tribes, nations, and languages, that spark remains flickering in our longing to understand, to belong, and to dream. As we drift toward rest, let the echo in myth soothe you, a reminder that beyond the borders of culture and creed, there is a place where we all once stood together, looking up, listening for a voice that spoke the same promise to every ear. Let that promise carry you gently into sleep, knowing that the dream we share is older than memory, softer than sleep, and more enduring than time itself. The Sumerian King List rulers who reigned for thousands of years, in the stillness of clay tablets and the soft glow of torchlight flickering across ancient walls. The Sumerian King List whispers a tale so out of step with modern understanding that it feels like a dream stretched across time. This curious artifact, etched in cuneiform, does not merely record the succession of rulers as we know it neatly bound by human years and lifespans, but speaks instead of kings whose reigns lasted for hundreds, even thousands of years, each line flowing like a river across the centuries. It begins in a time before the flood, a phrase that echoes across traditions far beyond Mesopotamia, as though civilizations scattered across the earth once remembered a single rupture in human history. Before this deluge, kings reigned. Not for decades, but for millennial Lulam of Eridu ruled for 28,800 years, followed by Alangar for 36,000 figures that challenge logic, yet are recorded not as myth, but as history. The list itself moves with a poetic rhythm, naming cities like Eridu, Butabira, Larok, and sure pick some real, some half buried in the sands, others perhaps only remembered in dreams. After the Great Flood, the reigns become shorter, more familiar, closer to what we now accept as believable. But the transition is gentle, not abrupt, as if time itself had changed, slowing down from the divine to the human. Scholars have debated the meaning for generations. Is this merely symbolic, an attempt by early scribes to emphasize the greatness of kings by stretching their rule beyond the grasp of mortality? Or is it a fading echo of something more profound, a remnant of a time when people believed, or perhaps even remembered, that the world was once guided by beings not bound by the limits of ordinary life? These rulers are sometimes listed alongside divine titles, their origins wrapped in cosmic beginnings, suggesting they were not only political figures but intermediaries between heaven and earth. The Sumerian King List doesn't argue or persuade it, simply states, in quiet certainty, that there was a time when rulers walked among mortals who were anything but ordinary. And unlike mythology, which is cloaked in symbolism and metaphor, this list presents itself as fact, as chronicle, as truth. Yet its truth is not rigid. It invites us to wonder, to sit in the soft space between certainty and mystery, in the silence of the tablets carefully unearthed from the ruins of Nippur and Lhasa and Ashur. We feel the presence of an ancient order, one that honored time differently, less as a ticking measure, and more as a sacred thread connecting the mortal with the eternal. Even the structure of the list reflects a deep respect for the passage of eras. Kingship is described as something that descended from heaven, was taken away, and then descended again, as though it were not a human invention, but a cosmic gift flowing in cycles. That idea alone shifts the heart, gently imagining governance not as conquest, but as inheritance from the stars. The King List stands not in isolation, but alongside other Sumerian texts and myths that blur the line between history and the divine. It speaks of an age when humans may not have walked alone, when guidance came from voices older than language, and when the rhythm of life was tuned not to clocks, but to stars and winds and stories passed from elder to child beneath an endless sky. As the listener drifts deeper into rest, the names of these kings linger like a chant: Luana, Ningawana, Dumusiji, the shepherd. Their sounds are foreign yet oddly comforting, like fragments of a song once known but long forgotten. The Sumerian King List doesn't ask to be believed in the modern sense, asks only to be heard, to be held gently in the mind as we cross into dreams. And in that liminal space between waking and sleep, perhaps we too can sense what those ancient scribes may have felt, that time itself is a mystery, and that our beginning may not be as ordinary as we once thought. Eridu, the first city and the first departure, in the warm cradle of southern Mesopotamia, where the ancient waters of the Euphrates once flowed gently across fertile plains. The city of Eridu rose like a whisper out of time, a place that Sumerian legend calls the very first city on earth, where civilization began its long and winding journey. According to ancient texts, Eridu was not just a gathering of homes or a center of trade, but the sacred point where kingship itself descended. From heaven, a phrase repeated like a sacred hum across tablets found in long-buried ruins. This city, thought to have been founded around 5400 BCE, was dedicated to the god Enki, the deity of wisdom, water, and creation, he who understood both the secrets beneath the earth and the mysteries of the sky. As listeners sink into calm reflection, we may imagine Eridu not as a bustling metropolis, but as a spiritual center, a quiet outpost where divine presence and human devotion met beneath the open stars. Its ziggurat, rising step by step from baked clay bricks, stood not in pride but in humility, an offering to the heavens above, shaped by hands that believed every corner of life was touched by the gods. It is in Eridu's silence, in its forgotten alleys and eroded altars, that the soft tension between the seen and the unseen begins to emerge. Unlike later cities with loud empires and rigid walls, Eridu's story is told in half-buried temples and crumbling foundations, in the delicate lines of cuneiform tablets that speak of gifts to the gods and rituals honoring the deep waters. But what sets Eridu apart is not just its age, nor its sacred temples, but its departure. The ancient Sumerians believed that kingship, after beginning in Eridu, was taken up and moved to other cities, Bad-Dabira, Larik, Siparaz, if the spirit of leadership itself moved like a guest from one home to the next. Why did kingship leave Eridu? Why did this first city, beloved by the gods, fade into silence while others rose? Was it a decision by the heavens, or by those who watched the stars too closely? Some suggest environmental shifts played a role, rivers changing course, soil growing weary, but the mythic stories suggest something more subtle, that Eridu was not meant to remain forever, that its sacred mission had been fulfilled, and that the spark of civilization was destined to move on, lighting other lamps in the darkness. Enki's temple, known as the Iabzu, was believed to house the very essence of wisdom drawn from the primordial waters. Pilgrims and priests would enter its chambers seeking answers not just about crops or trade, but about the order of the cosmos itself. And as they whispered prayers or listened to the trickle of sacred water through carved stone, perhaps they felt the weight of a knowledge too vast to hold, a truth meant to flow, not remain still. Over time, as the tides of civilization shifted and cities like Yor and Uruk grew into powerful centers, Eridu quietly receded. Its walls crumbled, its temples faded, and its name slipped from memory, yet its role as the birthplace of the human story never truly vanished. Archaeologists who have stood over its low mounds and scattered bricks speak not of grandeur, but of something deeper, a profound stillness, a quiet echo of something that once mattered immensely. In the gentle hush of night, when the sky opens wide and the earth feels ancient again, Eridu seems less like a ruined city and more like a doorway, one that opened once to let something divine pass through, and then closed softly without sorrow. The concept of the first departure resonates like a lullaby for the reminder that beginnings are often meant to be left behind so that others may follow. Just as Eridu gave way to other cities, so too must we occasionally release what we hold dear to make room for what is to come. The story of Eridu, then, is not one of loss, but of motion. A city birthed by the gods, guided by wisdom, and let go without fear. In its quiet ending lies the promise that even the most sacred places are not fixed points, but part of a greater rhythm that continues to echo through history and, if we are still enough, through dreams. The Black Stone of Kish, a mystery older than writing, long before the ink of history began to dry upon the clay tablets of ancient scribes, and even before the first known written word shaped the consciousness of early civilization, there lay a singular object beneath the Mesopotamian sun-dark, quiet sentinel now known as the Black Stone of Kish, resting in the remnants of what was once a thriving city-state. The stone sits not as an ornament or artifact, but as a whisper, from a time so far removed from ours that even myth struggles to reach it. Kish, located east of Babylon, was once considered the seat of power after the Great Flood, according to the Sumerian King List, and yet, even among the ruins of ziggurats and the fading records of god-kings, this smooth, obsidian-like stone remains a deeper enigma. It is not inscribed, it carries no language, no markings, no symbols of dominion or devotion. Instead, it exists as a presence and moving, unknowable and unyielding to time. For those who first uncovered it, and those who have studied it since, the black stone seems to defy the chronology that surrounds it. Carved or shaped by hands that left no signature, it predates even the emergence of cuneiform, the script that would become the breath of Mesopotamian culture. It raises a quiet, unsettling question. How could such precision and purpose exist in a world supposedly before civilization? Its surface is polished, but not industrially, smoothed, but not naturally. It is unlike the limestone and mud brick that defined the structures of the region. It resembles no ordinary basalt or native material of Kish, leading some scholars to wonder, was it brought from elsewhere, perhaps sacred lands now lost, or was it created from knowledge not yet understood? What was its purpose? Theories, like shadows in the desert, stretched long and thin. Some suggest it may have been a ritual. Object, the kind upon which oaths were sworn or offerings laid. Others believe it might have marked the divine center of the city, a navel of spiritual alignment between heaven and earth. But there are those who feel its silence is intentional, that the black stone is not meant to explain, only to remind. It stands in stark contrast to the literary richness that surrounds it: poems of kingship, epics of gods, treaties of war and peace, all absent here, all irrelevant to its quiet mystery. Unlike tablets that speak when translated, the stone offers no narrative, it simply is. In this way, it holds power not through knowledge, but through presence. As listeners drift softly into a place between thought and slumber, the mind may gently wonder about the kind of people who first touched this stone. Did they kneel before it, seeing in its reflection the shape of the cosmos? Did they touch it with reverence, hoping for answers or blessings? Or did they build their lives around it, not because they understood it, but because they knew it mattered? In this sense, the black stone of Kish becomes less a riddle to solve and more a mirror for the human spirit, our timeless impulse to anchor meaning in objects, to elevate the unknown into the sacred. Over time, the city of Kish would fade. Dynasties would rise and crumble, rivers would change their courses, and scribes would fill libraries with names and numbers, victories and prayers. But the stone remained immune to all these shifts. Its endurance, unmarked by kings or wars, offers a different kind of history, one that does not move forward but simply endures, reminding us that some truths are not spoken, only felt. In its quiet weight, it offers a lesson. Not all mysteries ask to be solved. Some exist only to make us pause, to slow down, to feel something ancient press gently against the edges of the present. And as the stars wheel slowly over what was once Kish, and the winds whisper low across sand-covered bricks, the black stone remains, watching, waiting, or perhaps simply being as it has for longer than we can say. The Baghdad Battery, ancient technology or ritual artifact, in the soft hush of museum halls and the dim-lit corners of archaeological storage rooms, there exists an object whose quiet presence invites both awe and inquiry. A clay jar, capped with asphalt and holding within a copper cylinder which once encased an iron rod, known today as the Baghdad Battery. It is a relic from a time when our understanding of the ancient world presumed no electricity, no circuitry, and certainly no devices resembling modern batteries. Yet here, in the gentle dust of history, lies something that does not quite fit its era. Discovered near modern-day Baghdad in the 1930s. The artifact is believed to be over 2,000 years old, possibly dating back to the Parthian or Sassanid period. Its construction is simple, yet curiously specific. The materials used copper, iron, and a sealant could, under the right conditions, produce a mild electric charge when filled with an acidic liquid such as vinegar or lemon juice. But the object offers no inscriptions, no directions, no accompanying devices or texts to clarify its purpose, and so it rests, suspended in the space between certainty and speculation, a quiet ambassador from a time that may have known more than we assume. Was it a source of power? Could it have been used to electroplate gold onto silver surfaces? A technique that would have required knowledge far beyond what is typically attributed to that period. Some scholars have suggested such a use, citing similar electrochemical principles known much later. Others have theorized it could have been used for ritual or medical purposes, perhaps to deliver mild shocks during religious ceremonies, or as a tool in healing practices, much like early electrotherapy. Yet still others believe it may never have held an electrical function at all. Perhaps it was simply a container for sacred scrolls, or a vessel for incense, or even a symbolic offering sealed away in honor of deities long forgotten. The truth remains just out of reach, as though history itself decided to leave behind a gentle question instead of a firm answer. There is a quiet beauty in that uncertainty, as we close our eyes and drift back to a time of bustling markets, temple chants, and distant desert winds. We can imagine the hands that crafted this jar not with the urgency of invention, but with the care of tradition. What did they intend? Did they understand the principles of conductivity, or were they following instructions handed down like sacred recipes, their function dimmed by generations? Perhaps they never thought of it as mysterious at all, only as something useful, or holy, or both. In this way, the Baghdad Battery reminds us that history is not always written in bold declarations or carved on grand monuments. Sometimes it lingers in the ordinary, in objects overlooked, in the fragments that refuse to explain themselves fully. It is not the only object of its kind. Similar vessels have been found, though none so widely discussed, that makes its presence even more compelling. Why this one? Why here? And why now, when its rediscovery speaks louder in an age that longs to reconnect the threads of ancient knowledge with the technologies of today? As the world outside quiets and sleep begins to wrap softly around the listener's thoughts, the Baghdad Battery remains silent, sealed, and still sparking curiosity. It asks for no resolution, only to be held gently in the mind, like a lantern that glows not with light, but with wonder. Perhaps it is not the answer that matters most, but the fact that it continues to invite questions across centuries and civilizations, whispering ever so faintly that the past may hold more power than we know, not in voltage, but in mystery. And in that mystery, there is peace. Library of Nineveh, minus 22,000 tablets buried for millennia, in the quiet heart of ancient Mesopotamia, beneath layers of earth that once bore the footsteps of kings and the rhythms of early civilization, lay a library unlike any other library, not of paper and binding, but of clay and time. The Library of Nineveh, buried beneath the sands of what is now modern-day Iraq, was once housed within the grand palace of King Ashurbanipal, the last great ruler of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Over 22,000 clay tablets rested there, inscribed in the elegant cuneiform script, each one pressed with a stylus into wet clay, then dried and preserved like frozen whispers from an age that spoke long before our own. These tablets, many fragmented and fragile, carried within them the stories, laws, rituals, myths, and scientific observations of an entire civilization, an echo of Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria, preserved not in ink but in fired earth. Some contain epic tales, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, revealing thoughts on mortality and friendship that still ring familiar today. Others hold mundane details, grain counts, inventories, contracts giving life to the hands that once farmed the soil or debated within palace halls. Some tablets were written in Akkadian, others in Sumerian, and some even carried translations between the two, suggesting an understanding of linguistic legacy and preservation that feels deeply thoughtful. And in that vast collection, one finds not just the ambition of an empire to gather and record all knowledge, but the quiet humanity behind it, the scribes, the scholars, the stewards of wisdom who believed that thoughts, if carefully shaped into symbols, could outlast the breath that first gave them voice. But time, as it always does, intervened. The great city of Nineveh, with its towering walls and intricate temples, fell around 612 BCE to a coalition of Babylonians and Medes. Fire raged, buildings crumbled, and the library was lost beneath the ruin. Yet in that destruction there was preservation. The very heat that consumed the city hardened many of the clay tablets, firing them into permanence, turning what could have been dust into enduring vessels of memory. It would be over 2,000 years before those tablets would see the light. Again, uncovered in the mid-19th century by archaeologists like Austen Henry Layard and Hormuzd, as modern scholars painstakingly deciphered the wedge-shaped marks, the voices of the past began to hum once more, not in loud declarations, but in soft revelations, tracing the celestial paths, documenting omens, explaining dreams, recording transactions, and telling stories that had slept longer than almost any others known to humanity. And yet, even now, many of those tablets remain unread, some incomplete, others eroded, with meanings still hidden in their hardened grooves. Some of their content points to lost texts and vanished traditions, while others connect in surprising ways to biblical narratives and later legends, suggesting that the boundaries between ancient cultures were far more porous than we often imagine. The library was not organized as modern ones are, no Dewey Decimal, no digital catalogue, but its intention was similar: to hold, to protect, to pass on. Some scholars believe Ashurbanipal saw himself not merely as a warrior king, but as a guardian of knowledge, a ruler who preserved wisdom as others might preserve borders. In a world without printing presses or cloud backups, the effort to collect, duplicate, and store thousands of clay texts speaks of a reverence for thought and learning that transcends its time. Today, many of the tablets are housed in museums, most notably the British Museum in London, where they sit behind glass, removed from the soil that once held them. But even in display, they carry a strange stillness, as if waiting for their next reader, or perhaps simply resting after their long journey through fire and burial. To imagine the library as it once stood is to imagine a place of careful labor, where the air held the soft scratching of styluses, the scent of drying clay, and the quiet presence of people who knew they were building something meant to endure. As you drift deeper into calm thought, let that image settle into your mind: a vast hall of stone, quiet and shaded, where knowledge was not shouted but pressed gently into permanence, where ideas were not fleeting but shaped to last, and where the boundary between the past and present is not a wall but a thin, delicate line of script that continues to whisper, if we listen closely enough. The Stargate theory, a portal lost in the desert dust, amid the golden silence of the world's ancient deserts, where time moves like wind over dunes and ruins fade gently into the horizon, there is a quiet theory that lingers between legend and possibility, the Stargate theory. It suggests that scattered across our planet, buried beneath forgotten temples or encoded within sacred geometries, lie remnants of gateways not merely symbolic, but functional passages between our world and another, perhaps to the stars themselves. One of the most whispered locations in this narrative is nestled in the Middle East, where the ancient city of Babylon once stood proud. Babylon, with its ziggurats rising toward the heavens and its associations with celestial deities, has long fascinated both scholars and dreamers. Within its mythology and architectural design, some believe lie hints subtle and profound of a device or structure intended to serve as more than spiritual symbolism. In the epic tales and stone inscriptions of ancient Mesopotamia, there are references to divine travel, to beings arriving from the sky or vanishing into realms unseen by human eyes. Deities like Enki, Enlil, and Ishtar were said to move between worlds, and while ancient cultures often used metaphor to express the unknown, the specificity of their language describing doors, gates, and controlled transitions between domains. Curiosity. One structure often linked to this theory is the Great Ziggurat of yore, its stair-like form rising deliberately skyward, echoing stories of ascension. Some interpret it as a symbolic ladder between heaven and earth, but others wonder if it served a more literal purpose. In the dry stonework of places like this, believers in the Stargate theory imagine hidden mechanisms or forgotten science, long stripped by time or buried by intention. Further east, in modern-day Iraq, the site of ancient Eridu considered the oldest city in Sumer is also part of this lore. Some theorists propose that its remote setting and sacred function may not have been chosen by accident, but instead strategically aligned with celestial coordinates, potentially marking the presence of a portal meant to facilitate contact beyond Earth. The notion grows even more intriguing when one considers the consistent patterns found across ancient civilizations that never knew one another, structures aligned to solstices, to star clusters like Orion or Sirius, recurring motifs of gates, spirals, and staircases carved in stone, all leading upward or inward. Could it be that these repeated patterns were not coincidental, but inherited echoes of a forgotten science or shared memory? The Stargate theory doesn't ask us to reject history, invites us to look at it with deeper curiosity. Not as a tale of primitive peoples reaching for gods, but perhaps as ancient civilizations preserving knowledge they once encountered, knowledge that may have been gifted or discovered. The term Stargate itself evokes images of science fiction, yet the ancient texts, when viewed without modern dismissal, sometimes read more like observation than allegory. In the cylinder seals and temple carvings of Sumer, winged figures pass through rings or wheels of fire. In Egypt, the afterlife is described as a journey through gates guarded by cosmic beings. In India, Vimana's mythical flying chariots are described in great detail, as if remembered rather than imagined. Still, the Stargate theory remains delicately balanced between myth and mystery. No physical evidence has been verified, and mainstream archaeology approaches such ideas with justified caution. But within the stillness of these ancient ruins, within the precision of their placement and the reverence of their design, something lingers, an invitation to wonder. For those listening closely, the question remains, not just did they exist, but why did so many believe they did? Perhaps the real Stargate is not a device of metal and light, but a state of consciousness, a window of perception opened by story, by ritual, by connection to the infinite. Perhaps the ancients knew that travel between worlds was not only physical, but spiritual, dimensional, symbolic. As the stars shimmer gently overhead, and the sand softly shifts across sleeping stones, the idea of lost portals becomes less about technology and more about yearning our ancient desire to connect with something beyond ourselves, something vast, mysterious, and beautifully unknown. So we listen, not to be convinced, but to be touched by the echo of wonder. The desert holds no answers, only silence, but within that silence, our imagination finds its voice, shaped like a gate, standing quietly in the dust, patiently waiting for a story to pass through once again. The need for mystery, why we search the sky for ourselves, in the quiet moments before sleep, when the world softens and thought drifts without resistance. One might wonder why stories like that of the Anunnaki continue to echo across generations, continents, and cultures, whether as ancient gods, cosmic visitors, or simply mythic reflections of the human spirit. Their presence in our collective imagination feels less like fiction and more like a mirror, something that reflects not necessarily what is out there, but what resides deep within us. Across history, we've looked up at the night sky and shaped constellations into meaning, woven narratives into the stars, and whispered questions into the cosmos, waiting for an echo. The tale of the Anunnaki, with its layered blend of mythology, mystery, and speculation, is one such echo. Some say these beings came from a distant planet called Nibiru. Others believe they were metaphors for natural forces or divine aspects of ourselves. Regardless of interpretation, the resonance remains the sense that we are not alone in our journey, and that our ancestors may have known more than we imagine. What is it about stories of sky gods, of star beings, of creators who descend and shape civilizations that feels so comforting, even as it unsettles? It may be that in the vastness of the universe, where we often feel small and adrift, these stories offer a kind of belonging. They remind us that wonder is not just a reaction, but a needed, deeply human response to the unknown. In the faces of the Anunnaki carved in ancient stone, we see both the unfamiliar and the familiar, figures with strange features, yes, but also intentions, struggles, wisdom, and even flaws that resemble our own. Were they real? That question, while compelling, may miss the point. What truly matters is why the stories remain, why they keep resurfacing across millennia, reinterpreted through new lenses, told again around fires, written into books, whispered into microphones. There is something in us that yearns for connection, not only with other beings, but with meaning itself. We want to know where we came from, not just biologically, but spiritually and culturally. The Anunnaki myth, whether viewed as historical truth or allegorical tapestry, provides a space where those questions can unfold softly. It allows us to imagine that maybe, just maybe, the universe has always been reaching back to us, even as we stretch toward it. In this light, mystery itself becomes sacred. It is not something to conquer or solve, but something to sit beside, gently, as one might sit beside an old friend in silence. The mystery becomes the invitation to slow down, to listen, to let our minds drift through ancient ziggurats, forgotten cities, and the shadowed corridors of temples lost to time. We begin to feel the weight, not just of stones and symbols, but of longing, the human longing to be part of something greater, to find patterns in the stars that make us feel seen. And so we dream. We dream of gods who flew in fiery chariots, of tablets that held the secrets of the heavens, of rituals that opened doorways to knowledge beyond the reach of time. And maybe, just maybe, those dreams are a kind of truth. Not in the scientific sense, perhaps, but in the emotional, philosophical sense, a truth that says we are allowed to wonder, to hope, to search. The Anunnaki, then, become not just characters in an old myth, but companions on that search. They represent our capacity to imagine, to connect, and to explore, both outward into the cosmos and inward into our deepest selves. They remind us that mystery is not the absence of truth, but the presence of possibility. And in a world that moves so quickly, that demands certainty and speed, there is deep comfort in a story that asks nothing but reflection. In that sense, as your eyes begin to close and the world softens further, let this be your final thought tonight. Not whether the Anunnaki were real, but whether the feeling they inspire, the quiet invitation to reach beyond the ordinary, is the real gift they left behind. For in the search for them, we so often find ourselves. The memory of the stars. What if the gods were just a beginning? In the quiet stillness of reflection, where thought becomes softer than breath, and wonder becomes more real than knowledge, we arrive at the final resting point of a long and gentle journey, a point not of conclusion, but of expansion, like the night sky itself. From ancient Mesopotamian cities to the whispered myths carved into forgotten stone, from star beings in winged garb to clay tablets etched with mystery, we've followed a trail not just of stories, but of feeling, of longing, of the sacred echo that has always hummed behind human history. And now, with all these questions behind us and no need to answer them, we may simply sit beside the last thought. What if the gods, those we call Anunnaki, or divine messengers, or alien visitors, or metaphors dressed in celestial light, were not the end of a mystery, but its earliest beginning? What if they were not final teachers, but first sparks? What if their true purpose was never to be understood literally, but to open the door for something more tender, more enduring, the awareness that we are connected to something vast and timeless, something that speaks not in facts, but in feelings, too large for language? Look upward now, not to seek, but to rest in that seeking. Across every culture, sky stories are the oldest kind. The heavens have always held not just our questions, but our very selves. There is something about the stars there, impossible distance, their familiar twinkle that mirrors our own existence, fleeting and eternal all at once. When ancient people wrote of gods from the stars, they may have been naming not visitors, but memory itself, ancestral memory, cosmic memory, the kind that cannot be measured but is always felt. And perhaps the Anunnaki, whether divine, symbolic, or something else entirely, are a vessel for that memory. They are how the past breathes in the present. They are how questions echo without needing to be solved. They are how our minds, even now, just before sleep, are allowed to wander without worry, to drift gently across possibilities, knowing that mystery, in its purest form, is never frightening. It is soft, it is slow, it is like moonlight on ancient stone. And here, in this final reflection, we do not need answers. We only need the space to feel that maybe, just maybe, we were never alone in our dreaming. Maybe the dreams were always guiding us, not toward finality, but toward something beautifully unending. In this moment, let your breath fall easily. Let your mind release every need to know, every urgency to understand. You are stardust remembering itself. You are story and silence both. And as the world outside fades into hush and your inner world becomes gentle and wide, You carry with you the one gift no god could give, but every myth has always offered: the peace of unknowing, the joy of wondering, and the quiet comfort that comes from touching something older than time, not with your hands, but with your heart.